Hello, this is your co-host Alex, just popping in to apologise for the sound quality of my voice in the upcoming episode. We've had some issues. Later on in the episode, you'll hear me make an ironic or perhaps prophetic statement about the sound quality perhaps being blamed on Friday the 13th. Regardless, we'll endeavour to fix this. I've done what I can for this, but I think you'll enjoy the episode anyway, just letting you know ahead of time. Okay, let's get on with it. Welcome back to the Red Barrels podcast. This time we're at number 11. That's all ones. I kind of feel like having to find something to say about every number is going to just drive me into a kind of a
Nobody made you do that. Nobody asked you to do that.
Numerology.
you
this one.
And
you
as we go further,
yourself
I will
with
I will
this.
continue. I'll just continue to like
This one you should have said. You should have said it was wonderful.
It's wonderful. 11. Yeah. There we go.
It's like bingo,
that's it.
isn't it?
It's done.
This is a curse that you have bestowed upon yourself, and I want you to know that.
You deserve this, is what we're saying.
But you're already hearing them. I'm Alex. Who are my co-hosts?
I'm Sofie or Soph. What do I usually introduce myself as? I'm Sofie or Sofie on Twitch.
Your name.
I'm Sofie or Sofie on Twitch.
Amazing. I'm Ed, and I'm not so freely on Twitch or anywhere else. I'm just Ed.
Yeah.
Just Ed.
Unlike Sophie, we're not free at all. We're all bound by our responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
We're really expensive. You couldn't afford it, honey.
Before we get started, I will just say again, we'd love it if you reviewed and shared us on social media. And if you don't, again, you are a coward. So please tell your friends. And also, before we get started, just a reminder that we have Games Transformed coming up. Yes, we're going to do this every week, every episode before it happens. It won't be that many because it's pretty soon. It's July the 11th and 12th at Pelican House. That's in Bethnal Green in London. And the big news is that since we have recorded our last episode, they've announced the program. So it's going to have all sorts of things. Of course, if you listened to the last episode, you heard world's greatest human, Tom Nicholas. He's going to be there.
He's still doing too much, I see.
My goodness.
I'm just saying.
You've learned
You
nothing.
saw him.
You've learned
Bask in
nothing.
his glory. But
Stop.
It won't just be him. It won't just be him. It's also going to be Chris Bratt and Quinns from People Make Games. Innuendo Studios. He's from YouTube. He's going to be there. Meghna Jayanth. She's an amazing games writer. She wrote Thirsty Suitors. She's going to be there. Marjan Did. She's a great kind of academic and writer. She was on it last year. She's going to be there.
We cited her book on this very podcast in like episode 2 or something.
Exactly. Gareth Damian Martin, the creator of Citizen Sleeper, the game we talked about last time. They're going to be there, and they're going to be talking about Citizen Sleeper 2. Loads of people. Matteo Menepes, he's going to be there. Max Haven, loads of people. It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. 11th and 12th of July. And, some say I fail as a promoter just because I failed to actually say the URL you can buy tickets from last time. Well, no longer. It's http www.tickettailor.com/events/games transformed. And of course, that link will be in the description. So yeah, that's excitement. And also, another thing's happening. Another thing before we get started. We can't have an episode without a fun, amazing, wonderful segment. And this time it's going to be Character Class Consciousness. Yes, it's back. And today, because, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking some Mario stuff a bit later on. It's an all Mario special, an all Mario game special. No Marios will be involved in this. However,
that's good because we've all made it really clear that we're all big Nintendo fans. Right, Sophie?
Hey, you should know these characters.
I'm contractually obligated to say that I love Nintendo.
Good. On our Marxist podcast, of course, we demand fealty.
Nintendo's my favorite product.
Well, the characters are Toad versus Waluigi. Who is it? Who's number one? Who is the most proletarian of the two? Let's hear it. Come on. Sofie, do you need any of these characters explained to you?
I know Toad is a mushroom.
He's a little mushroom man.
That
Do you know
that
Waluigi?
Who
definitely gives them
talks
lots
in a
of
high
points.
pitched voice, right?
It's more like weirdly low pitched. It's like
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, we've got
Yeah,
Toad on our podcast.
Toad's in the room, baby. Toad's in the room.
I just googled Toad by accident. It's just brought up pictures of toads.
Toad.
Which is
not gonna
I'll
help
probably
me.
Get it.
I recommend to all our listeners, just
right?
look up pictures of toads.
Just look up pictures of
They're
toads.
great.
I mean, we spend your time on the internet.
What's
that's
the
your own
difference between a
business. I'm
toad and a
not
frog?
gonna judge you.
Oh,
I
I
just
don't
want to
know.
let you know that I just did a Toad impression, but I think my Discord cut it out, so you will be hearing that on the Audacity
Wow.
recording, but not on Discord.
That's a fun treat for the edit for me.
You're welcome.
I want to say Toad.
You're gonna say Toad?
I agree.
I don't know. Since I stopped eating meat, I've become a real mushroom boy. So I
Oh,
just feel like
wow.
I've got that connection to Toad just from that point of view. You know, they're all like interconnected, aren't they? Mushrooms. They've got their like weird complex root
Mycelial
system.
networks, yeah.
The mycelium networks, exactly. So for me, I feel like that's like a metaphor for what we want society to be like. So yeah, it's got to be Toad.
I
It's got to
I
be Big Boy
see.
Toad.
I see. Do you have thoughts about Waluigi, Sophie?
I think Toad is more. I think Toad is more working class, more proletariat,
More
because
proletariat,
I guess Toad serves as one of Princess Peach's handlers, which sort of implies that he has no assets. It sounds like he might be a bit of a slave. It doesn't mention that he has a salary here. He serves a monarchist, right? Serves the queen. Is likely probably, not very fairly
The princess.
compensated
He
for
doesn't
that.
serve a queen. He serves a prince.
A princess, right?
Why
so I feel like
there's no actual monarch and only princess is a question left for another.
there's a question, and maybe Toad knows because he has all the monarchy secrets. But I feel like he'd probably have some things to say about serving a princess and maybe potentially not being fairly compensated for his work.
Okay. Well, I have to say, both of you are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
The correct answer, Waluigi, is something of a mystery. His actual occupation is unknown. He doesn't appear to share his. It's not even clear if Wario is his brother, but Wario has a great avarice nature for money. It's not clear either that Waluigi shares this. However, we can fairly assume that he is a member of an industrialized nation. Meanwhile, I would pretend that Toad is a serf, and serfdom is not proletarianism. It's not being a serf is not part of the proletariat under Marxist theory. So therefore, by definition, by process of elimination, Waluigi is more of a proletarian than the Toad serf.
I don't like this game.
I'm not sure about that. I maybe agree he's not a member of the proletariat,
told you,
but he
I
might be
told-
a member of the wider working classes.
He may be worse off than the proletariat, but the question is who's more of a proletarian.
But we don't know that we don't know that Waluigi is a member of
Yeah,
the
we don't
working
know.
class
That's
at
the
all.
thing. We don't know anything.
I'm just saying
We
we
don't
could
know
assume
anything
they're
about
part
I'm
of
it.
just saying
industrialized nation.
That your logic is incredibly flawed, and it's so embarrassing for you that me and Sophie have disproven your theory so immediately.
No. Look, I don't have time to summarize.
must be really difficult for you.
The reams of research
Mhm.
done to determine this beforehand. I mean, obviously,
Mhm.
it's been 2 weeks since the last episode. I spent most
Yeah.
of that time doing this. I don't have time to summarize that.
Yeah, well, show your citations, okay? Citations
Yeah.
needed,
Hey,
Alex.
hey.
Citations
It's the
needed.
lighthearted section of the podcast. No need for that. You
Doesn't feel
Citations
lighthearted to
needed.
me.
Right.
I've determined this. Okay, let's move on. First up, we're talking games, and it's a big week for games because there's a new console out. As I said, it's Mario themed today because the Nintendo Switch 2 has come out.
Landed.
It is released. It has been thrust
It's
into
escaped
reality
from
of
the
the world
dark
we live.
cave
It's
that
landed.
is kept in by Nintendo.
Yes, the
Switch
Nintendo
2.
Switch 2 has actually come out. It's real.
Ooh.
It's a thing that exists in our world. It's done extremely well. It seems that Nintendo, I mean, really the main thing you have to do to have a successful console launch is just make a lot of them. And it seems that Nintendo's been stockpiling them for months. So they've actually managed to sell like 3 million within the first day or something, which is apparently
Wow.
the fastest selling console ever. But again, all the others are constrained by supply. So it doesn't really necessarily mean that much. But yeah, that's happened. And as I'm sure all our listeners will be very excited to hear. I have one. I got it.
Ooh.
Highlight of your year.
Ooh.
I don't believe that you've got a Switch 2, Alex. Show us.
Untrue.
it.
Here it is. Wow.
Wow.
You can see it in the Discord
Gentle
window.
viewer.
Wow, it's all true. It's
I
all
can
coming
confirm.
Oh,
And he
that is a
appears to have
device.
A
Whoa.
Mario
There you go,
Kart game.
making a lot of noise. That's probably picking up on the mic. There we go.
It is.
Hey.
Don't copyright strike us, Nintendo.
No,
Please
no.
don't. Oh,
Wow.
delightful. It's so
beautiful.
shiny.
It is very nice. Look at it. It's got fancy magnetic.
Oh,
controller.
pulled off the
Snap in.
controller.
He pulled off the controller
That's
and
why
now
they
he's
called it a
reattaching it,
Joy-Con.
and it's just sort of, well, it was a little bit, but
It
he
was
got
a
it
bit.
there.
Yeah.
He did get it down there. Okay.
yeah.
It's so sticky. That's so cool. Wow.
Yeah, so I got one, and here's my thoughts. It's pretty good. Does feel like a bit of an anticlimax. It's just basically just a Switch, but a little bit bigger and nicer, and the games run better, which is useful because the games famously ran pretty bad on the original Switch. If you remember a few episodes ago, I talked about 1000 Times Resist and talked at some length about how badly that game runs on it. Unfortunately, it runs just as badly on this because they haven't patched it or whatever. I guess that wasn't really the problem, but maybe they'll put out a new version of it. That'd be very nice. But overall, it's just a nice thing. It's got a Pro controller that I bought with it as well, which is it's actually a very nice controller. The sticks are incredibly smooth. I don't know what they did, but they're super smooth. The sticks.
They buttered it up.
Yeah. I think that's it. I think they just poured some
put a lot of
actual
butter in it.
onto your
And,
controller,
Disclaimer.
gentle listener. Disclaimer.
We will not compensate you if you do that.
Do not pour butter on your Switch.
it's good advice, unless you're pros like Nintendo.
Remind me, Alex, how much did this set you back?
With this and the controller, which costs about 60 quid, basically came to about £500 altogether. And then I bought the I bought the
Chat,
bundle that
support the
includes no, this is for my own gratification. I wouldn't ask anyone.
Chat, don't support the
to
podcast.
think that
Whatever you do.
I have made a great sacrifice.
You really took one for the team there, Alex. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, you're
For buying a
welcome.
games
You're
console.
welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, so it costs about £500 with that, and it's the bundle where you get Mario Kart World. So, I mean, that's pretty reasonable console cost these days in this country. It's more expensive in America, which is where a lot of the complaints have come from. But yeah, it's just a nice system. There is currently not very much out for it, unfortunately. Mainly, probably the main benefit is just playing older games now at better frame rates. There are a number of games that Nintendo have set out actual patches for. For instance, Zelda Link's Awakening now no longer has its frame rate problems. The open world Pokemon game that came out a year or two ago, which apparently ran absolutely terribly. I mean, you can watch some nightmare videos on Digital Foundry about that. It's basically fixed. It's now great and runs buttery smooth, and all the problems are largely solved.
Alex, Link's Awakening.
Yes, there was a remake.
Did they re-release that recently?
It was a few years ago. But yes, there was a remake of it.
How did they make
a couple of years ago
a remake of such an old game so difficult to run?
No, I mean, the original
That's a
game
great
was on
game,
the original Game Boy, to be clear.
Yeah, I played it.
To our
Played
listener. Great game, but they did a
It's a
remake
great
of it.
game.
And it's a very nice little game, but it had this weird thing where it would just drop from 60 down to 30 frames a second for long periods of time. And it was very, very jarring. That's now fixed. They've also put out some actual, proper official patches that you usually have to pay for the two big Zelda games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So if you're a member of Nintendo Switch Online or something, you get it for free, which I am. Again, they run buttery smooth and they look super crisp. It's very nice. But I've played those games before. I don't really have any wish to go through the whole thing again. The only real games that are out, there are basically 3 games that are of interest really at all. And they are Cyberpunk, which is a pro Cyberpunk, and you can now play it on your Switch. 2, and from everything I've heard, it runs pretty well. It's an okay way to play that game, though very far from the best way to play the game.
Have you already played that one?
I already played it on the Xbox ages ago, so I haven't got that. But the other ones are Mario Kart World, which is basically their big launch game, and a weird little side game they brought out called Welcome Tour, Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour. This is a weird game where it's basically like an elaborate kind of manual / promotional thing for the Switch 2. It's basically set up like a museum that you look at from above, but the museum is in fact the Switch 2 and all its various accoutrements, and you just walk
Whoa.
about on the console as a little man, and you go see, and you can literally go to little kiosks and take quizzes about the various features of the Nintendo Switch 2.
You take quizzes.
Yeah, you take quizzes, literal quizzes. It gives you
Wow,
little
that's
info
really
thing.
exciting gameplay.
Yeah, and there are like mini games that like show you how like one of the features this machine has is the detachable controllers. You can turn on the side and they turn into a mouse. Works
Mhm.
pretty well, but like for instance, it's a little mini game where you can basically use a mouse if you've not used one of those before. It's how mice work on computers. But there is a couple of little things like the mice, because of the controllers, they can vibrate, they can rumble. You can turn them so that you can actually have the arrangement of the mice. You can like turn them sideways and stuff. Things like there's little mini games around that. It's like a small thing. Frankly, it would be very charming, I think, if it was free. It isn't free. It costs £8.
What?
Yeah, I happen to have. When you buy things on Nintendo Switch previously, you gain loyalty points basically, and I happen to have a bunch saved up, so I could just buy. I just bought this for free with my loyalty points. I didn't actually spend any money on it, and for that, it's a fun little thing. If you are so incredibly rich that £8 you don't give a shit about, uh, or you have free loyalty points or something, I would recommend it. It's a fun, charming little thing that I messed about with. But it
Oh,
obviously
I
shouldn't have
hate
cost
that
much.
cost £8 though.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm really mad
I
about
couldn't
that.
buy
It's
that out of
basically like a
principle.
tutorial.
I mean,
It's
if
a
I
fake
wanted to
tutorial.
talk about on here, and I could get it for sort of free, so that's basically what.
Yeah. Again,
But
thank you for your service.
oh yeah, you're welcome, listener. But yeah, it's a fun little thing. Yeah, I mean, it is genuinely very charming. If it was free, I think everyone would have loved it. Would have gone over on Bit Gaga for it. But there has been like very much a kind of an air of negativity, I think, online. Partly because I think there is just a general air of negativity about everything, and especially video games. Understandably, in many ways, there are many problems with video games, and also, the anti-woke bullshit kind of reinforces this a little bit. I don't want to call everyone who's negative about games anti-woke, though. That's certainly not the case. But I think people are being a bit harsh and just finding any reason. I mean, you don't need to buy it if you don't want it. It's it's £8. It's pretty clear it's not going to be a proper game or something. It's just a charming little nonsense. But yeah,
Like
I mean,
part
I
of the
like it.
part of the wider thing though, isn't it? Like especially in the US from what I'm seeing,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
increase in price in general of the games has gone up. It is like
yeah.
quite substantial compared to here.
Yeah.
So
Basically, Mario Kart World, which I'll talk about in a sec, cost $80 in America, which is like the old, like
That's so
a
much
few
money.
years ago, a while ago, like the standard for your AAA game was $60, and then
yeah.
for the PS5, they started to push it up to $70, and now that Nintendo broke the $80 barrier, and we've already seen like Microsoft have announced a game that's going to be $80. So it seems like that's probably going to be a new standard, and it seems like Nintendo set the standard. So they're particularly upset about it. Here, the prices are more in line with the big AAA games that already exist, so they haven't really done that. But I mean, they are still expensive, to be clear. But the big game is, as I've said, Mario Kart World. We've talked about it a little bit before. The new Mario Kart, the last Mario Kart game, is the biggest selling game on the Switch. It's a ridiculously huge seller. So it's understandable that they'd open with this one. And this is kind of a bit of a new paradigm because it has a whole open world. So the way it works is there is an open world, but there are the normal Mario Kart style tracks are places in the world. They physically exist in the world. But then between all those tracks, there is a countryside and networks of roads and stuff that you can wander about on. Now, the way it works in game, there are two main modes. There's the normal championship mode, just like classic Mario Kart style. But the twist is that the first track you'll do will be a regular, loop around a track as normal. But then for the second track, it will be the drive from the first track to the second track, and then one lap of the track itself. So basically,
Wait, so it's like a race to get to the track and then just do one lap of the track?
yeah. So it's essentially the first two laps are the journey to the track, and then one lap of the track itself, so that's how that works. And then the second
Wait,
mode.
is the journey from one track to another track, like, is that sufficiently fun for that to feel like it's Because you're basically making that 2/3 of a track by itself.
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
see what I mean. So
It
is
is.
that, does that work?
It's really fun. It basically means you aren't repeating any of the track at all. And
Mhm.
while most of the actual roads, there's a lot more kind of just long straight roads in the open world than there are on the actual normal tracks. But even those roads, they'll just have like a lot of traffic on there. They'll have things to do. The traffic is, it's a Mario world. So there's, mushroom houses and Koopa Troopers and question mark blocks and stuff all over it. So it's all kind of fantastical stuff. There's like enemies that attack you on the track sometimes. There'll be like a Hammer Brothers that is on a car that's throwing hammers at you as you're driving. So there's a lot enough in there. And also, I should say, a big thing is that they've increased the number of drivers from 12 to 24, which is like a massive jump up. And there's just way more happening, especially in the middle of the race. It's just like a huge scrum of drivers that, constantly goes on. So it is, yeah, genuinely very exciting. I suppose to kind of skip to the end a bit is that, yes, it's a very good Mario Kart game. The driving is great. It's very exciting. I've played every Mario Kart game up to now, and I think this is probably the best one. It's the most enjoyable one.
Wow.
The tracks are great. The roads up to it are great. Yeah, it's fantastic. The second big mode is knockout mode, which is basically, again, in the open world. It's just essentially a big route that goes through a number of courses and then goes from one side of the world to the other. And it doesn't stop at any point. It's just one big race. And there's basically big checkpoints that you drive through, and you have to get above a certain ranking. And if you're below it, you get knocked out. So you just work your way through the race, and this can be really fun. Although the downside is that because Mario Kart is famously, the thing about Mario Kart is you will get fucked over at the last minute before the race line. You'll get hit by the blue shells and stuff that you can't control. And that's bad enough in normal races where you have 6 races in a row and you're like, well, okay, this isn't that big a deal. I made the points up elsewhere. On the knockout races, it's just the big lead up to the very end. And if you get fucked over at the end, well, you're screwed over and the whole thing is kind of lost. But it's still...
They've increased the devastation that Mario Kart was already rife with.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the main thing. There is the ability to just kind of drive around and explore the open world. It's a little bit separate. You have to like press a separate button on the main screen that isn't not even terribly obvious that button you can do that. And there isn't that much to do in the open world. There are these little key switches from Mario that you can hit, and they start a little challenge that you can do, and the challenges are pretty fun. And there are like little pickups you can find, but all you get from any of these for completing the challenges or the pickups, you just get a sticker. That's all you get. There's no level of kind of progression or anything. So it's not like, I know, other open world games, Breath of the Wild, where there's a real incentive to go explore. It's just for the fun of it, really. And that's pretty much the game in a nutshell, all of it. I would say that I think partly this game contributes to the feeling of Switch as a bit of a disappointment, especially compared to the original Switch, because when the original Switch came out, it came out with Zelda Breath of the Wild, which was like a whole new kind of paradigm of video game. This colossal world you could explore that was super detailed, and it really felt like, oh wow, this is what video games are going to be from now on. This is like a new paradigm. Open world racing games have existed for quite a while. This doesn't really do anything new. It's just Mario Kart in one of those. I mean, in some ways, your Forza Horizon and so on, they do more kind of advanced stuff like in the open world. In those games, you can see other cars, other online cars racing, and you can like join into impromptu races with them and stuff like that. You can find other cars out in the world and things like that. There isn't really anything like that here. Driving around on the open world is just it's quite relaxing. It's quite enjoyable doing it, but there's
just you in the open road.
Yeah. There's no real kind of incentive to do it. So it's kind of like a far less kind of, I don't know, progressive in game design terms game. But it is a very good game for what it is. The music is kind of phenomenal. There is a huge amount of it. Every track, as normal, has a theme to it. But also, when you have the drives between the tracks, that's also music, that like separate music for those. And then in the open world, you've got, when you're just driving around, you have a whole new bunch of tracks, which are these kind of like easy listening versions of old Mario songs, which I know is catnip for me because I'm a loser. But yeah, it's
You're
just
a legend.
oh, thank you. It's just like a huge amount of music, just a massive amount of music. And of course, Nintendo, who refused to put their music on like Spotify or something, have their own app, which does not have the music for this game on it, and probably won't for many months because they add one game in every.
For the listener, both
like,
Ed and I
3 weeks.
both rolled our eyes at that.
Yeah, that's classic Nintendo. Classic Nintendo that they do that. But yeah, I mean, Mario Kart is great. I played a bit online, and online is insane with the 24 players. I mean, it's just it's
bet.
like one of the most kind of intense because you are just constant because you realize as soon as you play online how much kind of balancing and fakery basically the computer does in one player
Yeah.
to kind of balance out how often it's throwing the crazy power-ups at you and stuff. Whereas online they just like never stop coming. But it is pretty fun. But yeah, it's just a really, really good Mario Kart game, basically. I mean, look, if you want a Nintendo Switch, definitely buy it. You'll have a great time with it. I wouldn't say it's a must-have to buy. You know, you got to buy the console for this. Probably wait if you're not a big old mark for this kind of thing like I am. Probably worth waiting. It seems that it will be probably quite easy to actually get a machine. As I said, it seems that they wildly they manufactured more of them than any other console launch has ever done before by quite a large margin. So apparently it's already quite easy to find one in shops. So yeah, I recommend it. It's fun. I couldn't really enjoy the improved Switch games because I've been actively avoiding playing games that I hear have bad frame rates and stuff for years now, thinking that a new console was around the corner. But it hasn't been until finally it is. So maybe I'll go back and play some of those. But yeah, I mean, look, I enjoy it. I'm a weirdo who buys consoles when they come out. So for me, it's great. But if you're like, do I have to buy this right now? Probably not, is what I'd say. But yeah, talking politically a bit though. I don't really have a huge political take on Mario Kart World, other than my my questions
Weird.
over whether it's a feudal kingdom or not, and whether Toad counts as a proletariat. But something that is quite, I don't know, it just occurs to me when I play this game. So this is an open world game. It's the first kind of proper open world Mario game. There was Bowser's Fury as a side thing for the re-release of Super Mario 3D World on the Switch, but this is a very small little open world in a kind of weird abstract space. It wasn't meant to be like anything approaching a real place. Presume almost certainly at some point, probably sooner rather than later, they'll put out a proper open world Mario game, 3D Mario platformer game in which you can like explore the Mushroom Kingdom and stuff like from the movie and so on. But this is the first time they've ever done anything like that. And it's just notable that it's full of fake advertising. So it's just like to make it feel like, oh, it's like sort of like the real world. It's like Mario Kart has always been a bit more realistic than normal Mario because it's like always been like racing stadiums and stuff in it and all sorts of other places you might want to race in. But now there's an entire world and roads connecting them and cities and so on. And it's full of like branding for things with Mario stuff on it, like red shell petrol or Larry's lights. Larry the Koopa kid. You can buy lights, I guess, for cars from him or something like that. Just full of stuff like that. And there's nothing really wrong with this, and I suppose it's just a reflection of the world we live in. But there's just something a little disheartening about the idea of like, okay, we're going to create this fantasy world, and of course we're going to fill it with brands.
That's so depressing.
You know,
the capitalist realism strikes.
Yeah,
that's so depressing.
I can't blame them. I can't blame them because I mean that is the world we live in.
Some places, I remember I went to Finland and they have no advertisements on their trains.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it was like immediately noticeable, and it's very strange that you're like, oh my god, there's no advertisements on the trains. Like it's just not, you're not just being bombarded by bright color. Actually, I don't think they didn't have any public advertising at all, actually. Now that I think about it, I don't think it was just on this train. They also just didn't have any like billboards, any big signs, nothing. They just didn't have any public advertising. The only public advertising was like outside a business front would have obviously its branding on the building. But like otherwise, like there was no, maybe I've misunderstood, but that was in Helsinki. There was no advertising everywhere. I remember the train stations as well. That's what made me think, oh no, I was actually not just the trains. The train stations as well. Just completely like just blank walls except for art. They just had art. Like where we have our big, like, you know, the tube posters where you're like waiting and looking at the sort of track. They've got these massive, obviously, advertising here in London. It was just art. It was really nice.
That sounds so much better.
It's
Yeah,
so
that'd be
much
nice.
better. It's like weirdly like I remember thinking like, oh, I don't realize like how much attention I pay to advertising around just because like
Mm.
maybe it's just because I have ADHD, but I think a lot of people do obviously look at advertising as something to look at. But when you don't have anything to look at, you're surprisingly a lot less exhausted in terms of just having
Mm.
your attention constantly pulled in all directions. It was very strange.
Wow.
Mm.
That is. I mean, yeah. I mean, to be clear, they've been doing this for a long time in Mario Kart. In Mario Kart 64, which was the second Mario Kart game, they had fake adverts on the sides of roads because it's meant to be a bit like racing, and racing is covered in advertising, right?
Yeah.
Obviously a cartoon version of it. So I don't really want to blame them, but it was very striking that just like everywhere in this world, and as I said, for all the things you do in the game, the collectibles you find in the open world and the challenges, you get these little stickers, and a lot of the stickers are some sort of brand that
Yeah.
you find in the world. And just like so, it just seemed very noticeable, and just a little depressing that like
I guess
in this
what's
weirdo fantasy world, they're like, well, we got
yeah,
the branding.
like I think what's upsetting about it is that like it's not that they did the advertising. I get why they did it is because they wanted it to look like the real world. But what's depressing about it is that we would say this looks weird if it doesn't have
Yeah, yeah.
advertising. Advertising is such a natural part, quote unquote, natural sort of everyday occurrence of our world that it would then render a landscape fairly unrecognizable without that advertising, and that's what's really depressing about it.
Mhm.
Like the
Yeah,
fact
in
that
like
I
a
was in Finland and
cartoon.
noticed it immediately, the absence of advertising is crazy. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Ed.
and it's
Yeah.
like caricatured versus
Yeah.
reality,
Yeah.
where you like heighten the things that are most prominent.
Yeah.
It's like a real wake up call that, oh my god, advertising is so prominent; it needs to be included even in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, and speaking of adverts, actually, I've been getting Switch 2 has been advertising itself very aggressively to me. But it's always been the same game every single time, over and over again. Fortnite.
Oh, really?
Oh.
What is happening? Why would they advertise?
Why would anyone play
They've obviously
Fortnite on
spent
the
a lot of
Switch?
money. Yeah, spending. They spent a lot of money trying to convince me to buy a Switch 2 to play Fortnite.
Well, I
I
mean,
just don't
So
understand.
weird.
I mean, you can play Switch 2. You can play Fortnite on the original Switch already, but
Of course,
I
you can
mean,
play it on your phone.
it's quite a bad version of it. And I
Yeah.
imagine there are a lot of kids that's how they play Fortnite. So if they want a better
Those
version
kids
of
are
it,
losers.
they really want to see Tomato Town and all its glory, they could get it on the Switch, I guess.
They're not
Switch
going to
2.
get
Yes.
anywhere unless they play on PC and in a first-person shooter. Good luck.
Although now it's got the mouse.
You're
the
never
mouse
going to
on
get
the
on
mouse,
the
maybe.
competitive
controls,
scene. Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
Mouse
fair.
controls, yeah.
Yeah.
This is it. This is how we make a new. That explains why they're doing it. They want to create
Yeah,
a
I
new
take it all
generation
back.
of esports.
Please advertise Fortnite to me more when I'm trying to like
That's weird.
go
I've
to sleep
certainly
listening
not
to a
seen any of
YouTube
that.
video.
But maybe Nintendo already know that they've captured me and they let me
Yeah.
go.
You're in their warm embrace. And you cannot
Unfortunately,
escape.
yes. Unfortunately, yeah. All right. Well, next up, it's Ed with a kind of let's say a sequel to a previous
Good.
a previous game he's talked about.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So the game that I'll be discussing is Split Fiction, which is a 2025 co-op action-adventure game from Hazelight Studios. This very cleverly fits in with the Switch 2 theme because you can get it for the Switch 2, although I didn't get it for the Switch 2. I'm not like Mighty Alex. I'm still on my tragic PlayStation 5,
Oh,
unfortunately.
very sad. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so like Alex said, this is kind of a follow-up to our conversation around It Takes Two that was in episode 6. So this might be a little bit shorter than normal because there's a lot of sort of comparable stuff. I don't want to cover everything twice. So yeah, this section probably therefore works best if you've either played one of these games or preferably if you've listened to episode 6 of our podcast.
And if
But
you
the
haven't,
thing-
what's wrong? What's wrong? with
What are you doing? What are you doing?
you? Go back and
um,
listen to all the episodes. There's only 10 of them. There's no excuse. Do it
Exactly.
again, or you're
Well,
a
11,
coward.
11
Maybe-
now, 11 now.
Well, no, this is the 11th. You're listening.
Yeah,
to
yeah,
this, So
yeah.
there are 10 previous episodes, and some might say it's a bad idea to call our listeners cowards over and over again. But you're forcing me into it, listener. Come on.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate being backed up so strongly. The thing that makes this game stand out, really, from the sort of crowd of video games that exist, is just the same thing that makes It Takes Two stand out. They're very, very polished co-op games, clearly designed to create a particular relationship between you and your partner. You've got to rely on each other to get through the game. You've got to be patient. You've got to, share what you've learned to beat the bosses and stuff. So I think everything I said in episode 6 about it feeling like a perfect game to play in a partnership where one of you plays video games and the other doesn't. I think that's equally true of Split Fiction as it is of It Takes Two. That said, I do think Split Fiction might be just slightly harder than It Takes Two. So in many ways, it feels like if your partner is like brand new to games, perhaps It Takes Two is the better starting point. So let's put that stuff to one side for now. So just to summarize the co-op part of it, listen to episode 6, but it works just as well as a cooperative game as It Takes Two in basically the exact same ways that It Takes Two work. And that's not, that could feel like an insult. That could sound like I'm saying, oh, they've already done it, they just repeated it again. But it sort of doesn't. It still feels sort of quite fresh to me, even though I've literally just played It Takes Two. It doesn't feel sort of lesser for not being so novel. If you liked It Takes Two, which I absolutely did, you will like this game. That's the long and short of it. So, okay, now I'm going to focus on the Split Fiction more directly. So in Split Fiction, you play as either Zoe or Mio, who are both aspiring writers who have been given this opportunity to test out a machine which lets them experience a simulation of a story that they've written. A glitch then causes them to be trapped together in the simulation of their stories, and the game primarily cuts back and forth between Zoe's story, which is like in an escapist fantasy setting, and Mio's, which is more like a grungy sci-fi setting. And as you travel through the worlds of their stories, you uncover more about each character and experience them like coming to terms with the real life events that sort of motivated their stories, if that makes sense. So firstly, I really enjoyed the flipping between the sci-fi and the fantasy elements. It just made it feel quite varied. I mean, It Takes Two is already characterized by its variety, but it added a new little flavor to that, which I really enjoyed. It gives you sort of two very distinct sections of the game that you can look back on. I will say in general, I think the zones, the locations are possibly overall a bit less distinctive than It Takes Two. And I think that's partially because It Takes Two, it sort of took place in like a sort of like a spatially logical place. Like you started off in a garage and then you moved to a tree and then you moved to a room in a house or whatever. So
just to remind everyone that in It Takes Two, you get shrunk down into little space to a small size. So you're exploring a normal house as an ant, size of an ant.
Exactly. So that for me means that I can kind of quite easily remember all of the levels in It Takes Two, because it's like, oh yeah, there was that one, then there was that one, then there was that one. Well, even though I've literally just finished Split Fiction, looking back on it, I can't really remember like exactly what the locations were. I had a really good time with them while I was playing it, but they've not quite stuck in my head as much as It Takes Two. Similar to It Takes Two, the variety of the gameplay is a real selling point for the game. Again, it feels like an introduction to sort of a wide range of games to a sort of newcomer to the medium. There's a lot of different vehicles and sort of animals you'll ride, or even animals that you'll become. There's different weapons you'll use. There's like side-scrolling sections. There's a bit where one of you's a fairy and one of you's a big ape. It's just still very engaging to have this kind of variety, and it manages to do it while remaining quite polished in each of those game mode, like each of those game types. So it just handles it really, really well. In fact, I would say it took me 14 hours, me and my fiance, thank you very much, to finish this game. Thanks very much.
Congrats, yeah.
Thank you, yeah, thank you.
How much of your now happy relationship do you credit to these two games?
95%.
No, yeah.
Well, look,
High praise.
wasn't engaged before I played these games, and I started playing these games, and now I'm engaged. So what can I say?
Exactly. Well done.
We played 14. We played 14 hours. I was sort of making notes as I was playing it for the purpose of this podcast, and there was only one bit in the entire 14-hour experience where I was like, that didn't work very well. That's quite unpolished. Which is, there was this bit where you're sort of flying through rings, and like you manage to get through a ring, it propels you through the sky to the next ring, and then the next ring, and then the next ring. If you mess that up and you die, it respawned you in such a place as to make it really difficult to actually hit the next ring that you wanted to get through. So I was just sort of stuck in this loop of falling to my death over and over again, hoping that the rings would sort of magically align on the next time I spawned, and then I'd be okay. But that's the only note I had of anything where I was like, oh, that's not really polished. They should probably have changed that a little bit. And I also just want to, I just want to shout out, there was a sort of SSX bit of the game, like with a snowboarding style gameplay.
I love SSX.
And I just made me feel so nostalgic for that game, for that game series. Yeah, it was really nice. I really enjoyed seeing that.
I'm a 1080 snowboarding purist.
Boo.
Get out.
Get out.
So yeah, in terms of the cooperation, the location, and gameplay variety, they're quite similar, the two games. But the place where Split Fiction I think is definitely stronger than It Takes Two is all the stuff around the story. So the first thing to say on the story is that both It Takes Two and Split Fiction center around the relationship of the characters that you're playing. It Takes Two is a sort of failing marriage. Split Fiction is two people that circumstances have thrown together, beginning to grow a friendship together after some like initial tensions. Both have this character arc that the game where they sort of build trust, and the players are also sort of going on that same arc. And while I thought that part worked quite well in It Takes Two, I did have some issues with that game. I think I specifically highlighted the pacing of the arc. It felt like the relationship growth took ages to really start and then went from 0 to 100 quite quickly in It Takes Two, meaning that the characters spent quite a lot of the game kind of annoyed with each other. And only in the last third did it feel like they were finally getting on with reconciling, even though it was obvious that that's what the game was going to be about the whole time. So I felt a bit both sort of too slow and yet also rushed. That's been hugely improved, in my opinion, in Split Fiction. While there's the same kind of dynamics as before at the start, with like a more grumpy character and a more agreeable character, the improvement in their relationship is paced so much better that it really feels like the two characters are sort of slowly, like organically building this friendship. And by the end of the game, when the two have become like really close friends who care a great deal about each other, that feels earned. That feels really earned. And if also that helped you connect to the two characters because you're seeing, it makes more sense emotionally how they've got to where they've got. I think that also is helped by the fact that they don't have a pre-existing relationship in this game. So you're sort of learning about the other character through the eyes of one of the characters, if that makes sense. Whereas in It Takes Two, they've obviously been married, they've got kids, they already know quite a lot about each other. So it's kind of a different relationship you're having to the characters. I think as well, the other thing that makes this part work quite well is, as I said earlier, as you're sort of slowly uncovering the underlying motivations behind each character's story as the game goes on, which means just through playing the game, you're learning a great deal about the sort of core motivations, like fundamental things that each character values, the quite private feelings that the characters have each put into their art that you're now experiencing. And yeah, so you're engaging sort of in multiple ways with the characters, more so than It Takes Two. So yeah, I think that means on like an emotional level in terms of the relationship, which again is at the heart of the game, I think this game works a lot better than It Takes Two. The other aspect of the story that I want to touch on is outside of the relationship. The story in Split Fiction, I feel like it works a lot better. It's definitely got more legs than It Takes Two. In that game, the actual plot is very minimal, really. It's a classic video game sort of thing. You travel to a series of locations with the goal of ultimately getting back to your normal life. Like, there's not really... You couldn't write it as a book. Like, there's not actually much of a plot. It's just a sort of an excuse to have a game, which is completely fine. But Split Fiction sort of moves beyond that. In fact, the game is clearly really interested, and I would say this is what the game is really fundamentally about. It's really interested in the value of storytelling. So we see how an analysis of like each character's story reveals a great deal personally about the sort of author of that story. We learn a lot about Zoe from like analyzing her story. Like, that's literally what's happening in the game. I don't want to go too much into the specifics of the story because like that's kind of an important bit, but I will do a bit. We see that both characters are seeming to use their stories as a way of escaping specific real life emotional issues that they're having. Early on, there's a definite sense that the stories are a way for each of them to avoid working through those real problems. We also get quite a strong sense of loneliness from both characters before they find each other in the game. But as they come together and they share their stories, the stories are sort of reframed. They stop being like a way of them escaping their problems, and they start to be almost like a kind of therapy for the characters. They're a way of sort of working through their real life issues, kind of coping and ultimately dealing with those issues. So as I say, I'm being deliberately vague because I don't want to... I am definitely recommending this game very highly, so I don't want to spoil it too much. So that's like one way in which the game is showing the value of stories as like a way of working through real life issues, as well as being a way of escaping when like you haven't even got the capacity to sort of deal with your issues. We also see, again, without trying not to spoil things too much, but we see that the stories they work as a way of honoring and like remembering people or things that mean a lot to them. So again, that's like another value of stories that the game shows. It's stories acting as a monument is like another potential that stories have. And all of this, these sort of like emotional through lines that you're getting with these characters is juxtaposed with the antagonist of the game, which is the CEO of the company that designed this simulation machine, whose name is JD Radar. He commodifies stories. Our character stories are very clearly sort of emotionally like charged and touching for the characters, but for him, there's something that is basically just a market value. It's very clear, very explicit that he views the stories as something that he wants to more or less steal and exploit to enrich himself and his company. This is highlighted as well by the fact that having to pay medical expenses is one of the motivations for some of the characters being here, and we also see that character is having problems with their landlord in real life, with the landlord being a boss to be defeated early on in the game. So there's this definitely sort of soft anti-capitalism at work where this guy views the stories as a commodity to be sold, whereas the other people are experiencing their stories in a more like real emotional sense. And the way the reason I'm saying soft anti-capitalist themes is, okay, now I am actually going to spoil the game for about 30 seconds. So if you don't want any spoilers, skip ahead 30 seconds.
Feel free to skip ahead.
3, 2, 1. Right, at the end of the game, the shareholders see how dangerous what JD Radar is doing, and they call the police and intervene and prevent him from doing his crimes. So there's there's the fallback.
Famously,
There's these clear anti-capitalist stuff.
for doing that, yeah.
For sure. There's this anti-capitalist stuff, but then the good capitalists of the shareholders use the police to defeat the main greedy bad capitalist. But still, spoilers are over. Still, the anti-capitalist elements are definitely there, even if they don't fully commit to them. And I say that thematically, the core of the game, the villain reducing value of the stories to only the market value for which he's willing to risk other people's lives while exploiting them. I think the other main kind of theme, which also connects to the storytelling, which a lot of other people have picked up on, if you read reviews of this game or watch anything talking about this game, a lot of people say it's about this. There's a strong AI vibe to the story in this sense too. The machine is designed to take the existing stories of the authors and then sort of generate content based on those inputs in kind of an analogous way to how generative AI works, by repeating patterns in the content that's input into it, while the creators of that content have little control, receive little or no remuneration, even though the output is basically assembled out of their work. So I wouldn't say that the game explores this theme very deeply, but it sort of presents it as a bad thing that's happening. Clear analogy for AI. I don't really think that that's what the game's about in the way that some people seem to be talking about it. I think it's just a clear theme which is present in the game, which ties into this storytelling theme, which I think is the ultimate thing. And I think to back that up, I would say that Split Fiction began development in early to mid 2021. People didn't really start talking about AI being this huge big thing until right at the end of 2022, the start of 2023. Obviously, I don't know how far along the game was by that point, but it's halfway through its development cycle at that point. So if AI is really meant to be the thing that the game is about, I think it's very unlikely that they would have thought of that and introduced that into the game until at least halfway through its development life cycle. So yeah, that's my thought on that. So yeah, to sum up, I think it's a lot like It Takes Two in terms of the cooperation, in terms of the variety. Maybe the locations aren't quite so memorable, but it's fun that there's two incredibly distinct sort of genres that you're playing through. There are also other ones that you experience like briefly here and there, like side genres. I found the characters and the relationships at the heart of this game to be way more engaging. I felt much more emotionally invested in those characters. And I also thought those were just way more interesting themes at work. There weren't really wasn't that much in the way of themes in It Takes Two. Whereas there's clearly the value of storytelling, exploitation, especially of art in a world where AI is being increasingly used, quite prescient in that way. And yeah, I thought the game was really, really good. We spoke about this game in episode 2 when we discussed the 2024 Game Awards, and I was a bit skeptical that I would enjoy the vibe as much. And I was a bit worried, as I said earlier, that maybe the novelty would have worn off, or that maybe it would be overly derivative and it would just feel like a sort of It Takes Two reskin cash grab. But yeah, the novelty definitely hasn't worn off. I feel like they've just straightforwardly improved from It Takes Two in most respects. To the point where I would say Split Fiction is my preferred of the two games. And I would really recommend it to anyone looking for any kind of cooperative narrative experience, because those two are kind of more or less the best out there as far as I can see. So that's my take on Split Fiction.
I I was gonna say, I guess I'm curious, like, if they were to do a sort of third, sort of game like this, I guess, is there anything that you'd sort of like to see that you would like to see in like the sort of cooperative narrative
I will
space?
say before you say that, this is the third one. There was
Oh, sorry,
one
fourth
before
one.
these two. There was a Way Out, which is
Okay.
apparently quite weird, but it's basically the same thing. But yeah, so fourth one.
It's interesting. When we did It Takes Two, I did have some things that I would like to see, which is like I'd like to see with different types of relationship.
Mm.
And we've sort of covered between these two and between the three existing games, we've covered sort of big archetypes. I haven't played the first one. I believe it's about brothers, isn't it? It's sort of
And they're not brothers. They're two guys in prison who are escaping.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I must be confusing it with Prison Break.
You
But
might be
okay,
thinking of the game Brothers,
of the brother, yeah,
which they made
the
before
earlier
that
one.
game, which it isn't a co-op.
Not cool. Yeah, but so okay. So there's two games about friends, one game about romantic relationship. For me, it'd be interesting to explore different kinds of relationships beyond these two. Like, and not there's anything wrong with these kinds of relationship, but like there's an interesting space here to explore different kinds of things and try and simulate different experiences for the player as you go through. I will say, when I played It Takes Two, it didn't really occur to me that the story was sort of nothingy. It's only really now that I played Split Fiction that I'm realizing that was something that could be improved on. So I'm sure whatever comes after Split Fiction will be improved on in some way that I haven't thought of yet. Well, hopefully.
It's kind of interesting, the kind of anti-capitalist with the soft anti-capitalism stuff, and like the dodgy CEO and even the anti-AI stuff, because this game is published by EA, which is pretty notorious for all of that stuff. And I am reminded of, they made a sequel to Mirror's Edge, which was not well received from what I remember. But apparently in that game, there's an evil CEO who happens to look quite a lot like the actual CEO of EA, I mean, seriously, if you find a picture of that guy, he is a full-on Patrick Bateman looking weirdo. Like, he looks like he probably is also a serial killer. Although, for legal reasons, I will say that we have no reason to suspect that he is. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting that they do that stuff when they're also ensconced in it. I wonder if it's, them criticizing EA specifically. Probably not, maybe, but it's just interesting that that stuff comes out.
There's a word for that, isn't there? Surely one of you two can remember it. You've both got big brains. What's that word where like capitalist firms take on a sort of anti-capitalist or like maybe like protest aesthetic, like, and they sort of therefore neutralize any kind of potential that could have.
Like whitewashing or no?
Whitewashing, probably, yeah.
Well, that's not quite the word.
But you see them. Yeah, it's like it's a very popular thing to do, isn't it? To sort of
absolutely.
have a bit of
it is that kind of
anti-capitalist vibe.
But the vibe I get in these is less that per se, because this is well, it is published by EA. It's like they're EA partners. I don't think Hazelight, the company that makes them, I don't think they're owned by EA. I could be wrong on that. But this basically they started their EA partners, which was clearly at the time something of a PR move to like release these quite well thought of indie style. I don't know if we would really call this indie. It's probably a bit too big for that, but kind of indie style games. They made that game Unravel, where it's a fancy platformer where you're, again, a co-op game where you're like you made the pieces of wool and stuff. And it was obviously just a way to try and win a bit of good press, even if I mean, obviously I'm sure they're going for profit as well. But this isn't FIFA or Battlefront or anything.
The other thing I'm thinking is that I think we brought this up in a couple of other episodes ago, but like this sort of like passively anti-capitalist aesthetic, I think it's just become such a normalized part of everyday living that I don't think it's a particularly political perspective to have anymore. I think it's quite normal now to have big corporations and landlords portrayed as villains. I feel like in the sort of general zeitgeist, there's just a frustration with these two figures. So I'm kind of aware that like there are a lot of things that, even when I think about the sort of American Truck Simulator episode where we talked about sort of, blue collar work role play video games, it feels like there's a lot of games that just sort of passively accept that the system we currently have isn't working, even if they don't take a stand about what could potentially work. But there's clearly, I think, like a very mainstream voice of frustration coming through in a lot of media these days. Like, I think I picked up on that as well with like Severance, the TV show,
Sure.
I wouldn't say it's explicitly anti-capitalist, but it does have anti-capitalist notes in the same way that everyone's frustrated about working in a corporate
Mhm.
office. Like, nobody likes doing that. Everyone hates it. So I feel like that's kind of turned into a bit of a default perspective these days. So it's hard to identify it as like a specific political choice as opposed to just reflecting the reality that people live in.
Yeah, I noticed. Well, I mean, it will come up in the news later on, but in the Xbox showcase that they had, there were on 2 separate games. There were jokey references to capitalism
Yeah.
being bad. They
Mm.
specifically
I think,
said,
yeah.
"Oh, it's like in late stage capitalism" or something like that.
Like, if they don't, then they're just out of touch, right? Like,
Yeah.
that just is the culture at the moment. That is the zeitgeist, you know?
Mm.
Yeah.
It's
word
not
I
it's
was
not
looking
controversial
for
anymore. Yeah, go ahead.
was co-opt. It was
Co-op.
co-ops.
Oh, well done.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, so split fiction, and then I think we're going to move on to Sophie with some high class indie games or games.
Yes.
Well,
Ooh.
Yes.
it's kind of 5 games, isn't it? Technically.
I wouldn't say so. No, but I guess like it's so I did Kentucky Route Zero, which I've been very, very excited to talk about because I have been
Mm.
absolutely loving it. I'm gonna be very, very upfront about that. I have not finished it. There are 5 acts, I think. I'll get into a little bit of detail about what the game actually is, but just right off the bat, there are 5 acts, and I just started Act 4 today. But like I've just been playing it offline, so I haven't been playing it on stream. I've just been playing it offline. So don't worry, listeners, if you're in my stream and you're like, "What? I miss Soph playing this game." If you happen to feel that way, don't worry. I wasn't playing it on stream. I kind of chose not to play it on stream because it's very reading intensive. It kind of feels a bit like a novel, kind of in a similar way that Disco Elysium or even Citizen Sleeper does as well. Lots and lots of written prose. And it is entirely, well, not entirely, actually. It is mostly unvoiced. But I have been absolutely loving it. So just to tell you a little bit about the sort of basic information, I'm just reading from the Wikipedia page here, but Kentucky Route Zero is a point-and-click adventure interactive fiction game developed by Cardboard Computer and published by Annapurna Interactive. I love Annapurna. I feel like I've loved every game that they've put out, so I was really excited to play this when somebody sent it to me. They thought I would like it, and they weren't wrong. The game follows the narrative of a truck driver named Conway and the strange people he meets as he tries to cross the mysterious Route Zero in Kentucky to make a final delivery for the antiques company for which he works. A big sort of element of the genre of this game is that it's magical realism, which, for those of you who don't know, I'm going to go and also just get a definition of magical realism really quickly. But for the readers out there, a lot of magical realism is quite heavily associated with Haruki Murakami, the Japanese author. He's sort of quite the preeminent genre writer in magical realism. I personally have a very mixed relationship with his books. I won't get into detail, but he seems to be a massive misogynist. I love his writing. I think it's beautiful, and I love magical realism, but I hesitate to recommend him because he's a massive misogynist. But with that in mind, he is worth checking out. Magical realism, or magic realism, or marvelous realism is a style or genre of fiction and art that presents a realistic view of the world while incorporating magical elements, often blurring the lines between speculation and reality. So I love magical realism. I feel like it just makes a room for a lot of weirdness. I really like my fiction to be quite weird and surreal, and that is absolutely what Kentucky Route Zero is. It is extremely surreal. It is extremely weird. And I love it for that reason. It takes a lot of risks, and I think that's probably my biggest point of praise, is that it just takes so many risks. I believe it was crowdfunded on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
So, obviously they had quite a bit of creative control over the story, and it shows because it is extreme. It is just such a creative endeavor. There are some things I will talk about that don't quite work. I was talking about it with a friend as well. Don't quite work, but it's hard to criticize it because a lot of the minor flaws that the game has are kind of a product of the fact that they are shooting for the stars with every creative choice that they have made. So at worst, they're kind of just trying to be too creative. So it's a little bit hard to fault them on that. It's really quite endearing how some of these flaws are just not as good as it could have worked out, but I see where you were going, and that's a great idea, and I'm really glad that you tried that out. I'm a big fan of risk in my media. For those of you who've heard me talking about it before, I just feel like, we're quite used to sort of mainstays in the and cinematic universes and the like. So I really love a risky property, a risky sort of IP that tries to do things in a novel way that maybe not everyone is going to like. And I do think that probably Kentucky Route Zero is maybe a bit of an acquired taste. I think it's probably especially suited to people who sort of like their books more literary, their films a bit more arty, you know, because it feels like a very artistic experience. I do think it asks a lot of you in terms of your engagement and your sort of intellectual engagement with the game.
Are you saying this game is more highbrow than Mario Kart World?
It might be a little bit more highbrow than Mario Kart World.
Wow,
And
big
to be
word.
clear, I do think I'm better than you because I chose this as my game and not Mario Kart World. Anyway, as I was saying.
I played Kentucky Route Zero years ago, so yeah, don't
Yeah.
get there.
I've not played it, so you can both feel better than me.
Oh, I do. so I like I said, I haven't finished this game, but I'm very, very keen to. I think just right off the bat, I guess describing how some of the game mechanics work. Basically, the first sort of game mechanic that you encounter is just sort of obviously these sort of 3D worlds that you're sort of popped into, but the camera often moves independently of you. You do not have control over the camera. You can control it obviously by moving from one side of the sort of scene to another, and the acts are divided into multiple scenes as well. So it kind of very much feels like and is intended to feel like a movie or a TV series or something like that. Because of that, like I feel like some of the scenes can feel, or some of the sort of switches between acts can feel a little bit disjointed. And one of the reasons for that is because like I feel you sometimes swap perspectives of characters. You sort of collect a team of characters along the way. Initially, when you begin the game, you're playing from the perspective of Conway. All of your conversational choices are from the perspective of Conway. And then eventually, as your sort of team grows, you start having the ability to choose conversational choices from other characters in your group. It's unclear to me how much your sort of dialogue choices actually impact the direction of the conversation. It feels like, even if I sometimes feel like I've asked an irrelevant question or asked a question just to sort of get more information out of the person I'm talking to, it feels like the game still kind of gently leads me back to the sort of intended plot point. Doesn't feel like I'm being led too astray by my own sense of curiosity, which I think is fantastic because games like these, you really do want to find out everything about the world and everything about the characters that you're interacting with, because this is, if I haven't said this already, it is so well written. The prose are incredible. It's just very, very beautifully written. It feels like a novel. And every single character I come across is just such a curious incident of humanity that I really just want to just learn more about them, and I just want to ask them more questions about themselves, where sometimes it's very tempting to like, often the game will give you a choice between like, I need to, can you help me with this objective? Or like, oh, why are you crying? Where it kind of gives you the option to like focus on the objective, ask the person about the information that they can provide about the objective, or ask the person about themselves. And I found like a lot of rewarding dialogue just from like getting to know the characters and asking them just sort of seemingly, innocuous questions about their life. And I just sort of love that growth that occurs. So the sort of objective really early on in the game is you're trying to make this final delivery for this antique store that you're working with, which is, I guess, going out of business. You don't know anything about your character except all the dialogue choices. So your sort of dialogue choices are allowing you also to learn more about the characters that you're playing as, which is just a wonderful way to sort of do storytelling and do character growth as well. It's clear that maybe your character has struggled with some kind of addiction in the past, and also has some issues with seemingly confusing reality for memory. So sometimes it's unclear if you're experiencing a sort of personal flashback or if you're experiencing something in the moment, which, like I said, sometimes can be a bit, disjointed, but otherwise I think it's a very surreal way to tell a story. You're trying to find a particular address which can only be accessed by a sort of metaphysical highway, which requires some very specific and cryptic instructions in order to access. And I just fucking love that. I just think that's really cool. Like, I would love to read a novel just about a sort of hidden highway that you have to do a series of cryptic ritualistic activities in order to access. I just think that's a really cool concept. And once you actually do get to the highway, you get to Kentucky Route Zero, it's this very strange, Alex can maybe even help me out here, but it's this very strange sort of loop. It's sort of suspended in space where occasionally these sort of icons will drop down where it's like the polygon, the candlestick, the rocking horse. And it's implied that these are locations, mysterious locations on the Kentucky Route Zero that you can't quite stop at. And all of this is so that you can reach, these bizarre locations like the bureau, which is where it's this sort of Kafka-esque nightmare of bureaucracy where you have to go up to the 5th floor to find a particular person, but it turns out they're actually on the 3rd floor. But they've actually started filing papers on the 2nd floor, so you actually need to go back down. But actually they were seen in the kitchen on the 4th floor. And this sort of it's a Kafka-esque, I feel like, figures a lot in for this. There's a lot of Kafka-esque experiences in this as well. I'm a bit disjointed about this, but I want to talk about it in more detail in the next episode as well when I finish it. But there's just so many wonderful moments, and there's a lot of moments that kind of represent reality, but obviously in this very surreal, magical realism way that kind of just really make everyday moments of reality feel surreal, like the sort of experience at the bureau of being turned up and down this entire building multiple times and being told to file papers in order to file papers in order to file papers just kind of really calls into question our own sense of reality. There's this wonderful section where you're visiting a factory. I forget what the name of the level is, where you're basically looking for some information. You end up talking to someone who says, yeah, come on, I'll take you on a tour of the factory. And you go on this tour of the factory, and then eventually he sort of starts talking to a truck driver, and he's like, hey, yeah, so Conway's going to be driving the truck. He's going to be taking the job. And then you're sort of all of a sudden in an interview that you didn't sign up for. And then all of a sudden you've passed the interview that you haven't signed up for. And then all of a sudden you're in a celebration party to drink some alcohol for a party that you haven't signed up for. And so you take some of this drink. And then he's like, wait, but I'm not trying to get a job. Like, that wasn't my intention coming here. I'm just looking for some information. And the person leading you on this tour is like, oh, well, that's a big problem because that alcohol is very expensive. But that's okay. You can work off your debt by working here. So we'll just set you up tomorrow. You'll start working first thing in the morning. So this sort of really Kafka-esque nightmare of being stuck in a situation where you've applied for a job that you didn't apply for and you're interviewing for a job that you didn't intend to interview for, and then you get a job that you didn't intend to get. It feels like a Kafka-esque nightmare where it's like, I don't know how to get myself out of this situation. I keep screaming and nothing comes out, Some other sort of worthwhile mentions as well is that the sound design is also excellent. The UI is very simplistic, but also very beautiful. And sort of major themes that I've identified so much is, the kind of nightmarish circularism of navigating bureaucracy and capitalism. And also debt as well plays a big role in the story. There's a lot of debt. A lot of characters are in the positions that they are because they have struggled with debt in one way or another. So even the sort of heaviness of everyone's personal stories just feels really tinted by this shade of everyone's got debt and everyone's just kind of struggling and feeling stressed because they constantly have this weird looming sense of the horror of debt around the corner, which is quite, a magically surreal, horrific concept of just this thing that just constantly sort of looms over your life that is debt. So I just really love that representation there. One of my only sort of major critiques was that sometimes the sort of artistic choices of the interface makes it so that it can be quite difficult to access or quite trying to access the gameplay. And again, sometimes it does this in a way that's really engaging or interesting and creative, and sometimes it just doesn't work very well. There was this one particular scene where you're sort of panning around this circular monument and you're tasked with talking to characters all around this monument, but the camera moves really slowly and you can't interact with things until the little command to interact with things comes up. But the little command to interact with things doesn't come up until you've finished panning really slowly. So there's this sort of moment in the game where you're really struggling to push the narrative forward because you're waiting for the camera to catch up with you. And I get what they're doing. I get the choices. They want you to really sort of take the scene in. They want you to feel, maybe it is a deliberate choice, but it felt quite frustrating where I sort of literally had to wait for about 2 to 3 minutes for the camera to catch up with my character's actions so that I could then interact with the next thing that would progress the scene. So weird stuff like that where the UI doesn't really match up with the sort of artistic choices, which got a little bit frustrating. Sometimes also some of the scenes are quite lengthy and with very little of the player control, so they can get a little bit tiresome to sort of play through. I remember there's one, the transition between Act 1 and Act 2 is just an extremely long scene where there's three characters that you don't know sort of interacting with each other with dialogue that you just kind of have to click through, which I feel like it could be a little bit tedious for some players. The only voiced section of the game is another transition between two scenes, but I did love this very much, as tedious as it was you are on the phone to like an automated like voice service, and you literally have the phone sort of interface in front of you, and it says like press 1 for notable areas in the environment, and then you press 1, and then it's like press 1 for the lake, press 2 for blank, and you could probably feasibly spend like an hour going through each and every single option because it is very interesting and very curious, but at the same time, not really sure what the point is.
Well,
But I also think the point is that it's pointless.
I think I get the way this game came out was,
Mm.
I'd say there are 5 acts, and it came out. There were like a lot of time. They put one act out, and then they made the next act basically. So there was time between them, and became very drawn out. I think there were at one point years between acts.
Mm.
So those like interstitials between the acts were kind of things they put out to kind of tide the time over a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I could be wrong, but I think that phone thing was like a real phone number that you could ring up, and
Fantastic.
you could hear all this
Incredible.
stuff. And they basically collated it because
Yeah.
when it was all done, they put it out as a single thing, and they put it on like the consoles as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they just turned that real phone line they set up and collated it into that interstitial bit of the game. So I think
love
you
that.
could actually ring someone up and hear all that with.
Yeah. I love that. Again,
Wow.
that's just so creative and artistic, and I love it. They just took so many risks with this, and I feel like 80% of the time they pay off in a really big way. I think my only other sort of critique was that it's difficult to identify what events unfold due to your sort of individual choices as a player or due to the plot progressing, at least in the beginning, where it feels like you have multiple ways to approach a problem. But I wrote that comment right at the beginning, and I feel like over time, I was being gently guided. I would sort of, even if I sort of felt like I was deviating a little bit from the intended track, I think it eventually puts you back on rails, which I do like in a game like this, because I hate the idea of missing things out because I didn't do things right, or if I didn't do things in the right succession. So it does feel like a little bit, like it's holding my hand in that way, that it allows me some of my curiosity. I think that's the other thing, is just like really like how it encourages curiosity, encourages you to take your time with the conversations that you're having. Yeah, instead of just sort of, rushing through things or just trying to get the objective and move on. So, yeah, I think I'll probably have more to say about it and the themes it engages with once I've finished it. I feel like at the moment it's hard for me to sort of make any definitive analyses. But I mean, obviously, it seems to have a very nuanced, unlike what we were talking about earlier, I feel like it's a very nuanced thing to say about like the horror of debt and horror of capitalism in a way that feels very progressive, in a way that says like, well, this isn't working, we do kind of know why. And yeah, so that's my sort of overall thoughts. I can't wait to finish the rest of it and play the rest of it in the next one. I've been recommending to a lot of people. So you, listener, if you're the sort of person who liked, Disco Elysium or Citizen Sleeper, other sort of games that are very wordy and like novelty, then I think absolutely give this a look. It might be a little bit weird to get used to at first, but that weirdness it feels really worthwhile as an experiment, and I just love the novelty of it. But yeah,
I have added this game to my list while you were speaking. Sophie. You convinced me.
Thanks.
Yeah,
That's like praise.
Really up my street.
As I said, I played it as well, though it was years ago now, and I don't really remember that much of it, not enough to speak with great authority. But I did really like it. I mean, it has a really kind of very stripped down visual style, which is like really
It's beautiful. It works.
Yeah, like a lot of just like single lines over large expanses of color or just black. There's a lot of that, and it really works well. Remember at the beginning, it was like quite hard to get into at the very beginning because it's really not clear what you should be doing. But once you do get into it, it's a fantastic game. My only real problem with it that I remember was that, as I mentioned, this game came out over many years, and by the end of it, in like the final act, you could really tell that it hadn't really been a very kind of unified idea for the game. Like they just kept having more ideas as the game went along, and so by the end, it feels like it's like a pretty different game, though still very good. And I mean, it's in the world of Kentucky Route Zero, definitely, but it just feels like it's not a terribly like coherent piece because of all that time that took place over it. But it's still fantastic and definitely worth playing. I would certainly recommend it. And I would say, Sophie, you might want to check out. You can look up that either that Kickstarter, the original Kickstarter, which was like, I mean, it was one of like the early Kickstarters for games. That's how long ago the game took to make. If you look it up, you can see the original pitch video for it, which is so incredibly weirdly different and also significantly worse.
Oh, interesting.
It's like
Yeah.
really interesting to see like how much they changed the game
Yeah.
as they made it, because I mean, it used to have like this weird cartoony aesthetic and stuff. It was completely different. But yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend it. It's definitely in the pantheon of games
Yeah.
like these kind of anti-capitalist games like Disco Elysium, like Citizen Sleeper. They're also very well written. And
Yeah.
I hope we get more of them.
Yeah. Like I said, my sort of biggest gripe with it is just like some of the risks that just don't always pay off.
Yeah.
But like in a way that I'm like, I'm so happy you tried the like go for it. Like
I do remember thinking that some bits of it were, I thought, pretty self-indulgent. Like
yeah.
there's a whole section where it's basically about the history of adventure games. And while that's kind of catnip for people like me, it didn't really have anything to do with the story. And I was just like,
but
all right, come on.
I guess I didn't mind it because I was just sort of like, well, this is weird. I love it. I don't know.
Yeah.
For me, it felt like, something. I guess I
ways
also
to spend some time, but I thought like,
exactly.
you know.
I think the last thing that I'll say about it is that like this game kind of reflects something that I believe very deeply about creativity, which is just that we should just go for it and sometimes fuck up, where it's like sometimes you're going to try something creative and new and it's not going to work very well. But I love that this game is just kind of a testament of just you keep doing that over and over again. And eventually you're going to get something that hits really hard and is really, significant. So for me, it just kind of really resonates with me on like a creativity level of like creating stuff, an artistic risk of just like, just do it. Like if it doesn't work out, obviously, in the grand scheme of things, you don't always have like money on the line, but especially if you're creative as a hobby, for me, it just felt very like reinvigorating to be like, yeah, just fuck around, like literally just fuck around and find out, like,
Sure.
See what sticks, because I just think I just love the dedication to just let's do something balls to the walls, and then a lot of it is really interesting because of it. And sometimes it doesn't work, but like it's because they were trying to be too creative, which I'm okay with personally,
Okay, well, with Kentucky Route Zero driven along, it's complete.
In our rearview mirror.
That's the level of segue you get on here. We're moving on. Well, we're segueing into the news. I've got a big old bit of news to go through, but before we get to that bit, we're going to hear some tasty morsels from Ed.
Hello. Yeah, I've got 3 bits. One's a chunky bit, 2 really small ones. So one I just wanted to touch on, Star Wars Battlefront 2, the game from the second one, the game from 2017, has been popping off recently. I'm not quite sure how this happened or why this happened, but it's just despite having been out for 8 years, it's been breaking its player count records, which were really at quite a low point before this. Suddenly, everyone's got back on it again. I mean, I would speculate maybe it's the hype from season 2 of Andor, like that. And full disclosure, I just bought this game for the first time like a few weeks ago.
Wow.
I didn't know this was even happening. I know this is what I mean. I didn't know it was happening. I downloaded this game, went on Reddit, and suddenly everyone was like, "Oh, we're breaking all the records." It's like, what's happened? Star Wars, Disney been putting something in the water, so suddenly all the Star Wars heads are drifting towards this game.
I think it's you. It's you, Ed. It's you. You're the trendsetter. Everyone looks to you.
Yeah, all I'm saying is if they added Ahsoka, then I'd finally be happy.
Oh, yeah.
So that's an interesting little thing I just wanted to touch on, and I have been playing that with some of my friends, and it's a nice fun time. Despite its terrible launch.
Yeah.
So the second little bit of something I wanted to touch on was, as long-time listeners may know, I'm a big RuneScape boy. I love me some RuneScape, but the developers of RuneScape, Jagex, who normally I quite like, they've cancelled their Pride Month celebration this year for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, it's terrible.
And that's quite shit. I just wanted to put that on record. The Red Barrel's position is that shit. Bring back Pride Month or cancel Christmas, you coward. One of the two.
I think just to add to that, like a lot of Pride parades are like massively underfunded this year by like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this is a growing trend.
It's sad to see a sort of developer that you quite like going along with that kind of cultural backlash, which we're sort of suffering through for the next year or two, probably. So with that said, we're on to my main piece of news, which is that the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, or SAG-AFTRA as everyone else calls it, their voice actor strike is finally over as of June the 11th. For our listeners, we're recording on June the 13th, so it's quite recent. The strike had been going on for nearly a year. It started on July 26th, 2024, and they secured a 98% vote to strike in September 2023. So there was a lot of support for this. The strike has impacted many games companies, including Activision Blizzard, Disney character voices, Electronic Arts, Epic Games, Insomniac Games, WB Games, and so on. And the strike was mainly about paying conditions as it relates to AI. So quite fitting that we've covered the split fiction in the same episode. We have discussed the rise of AI models that can replicate an actor's voice a little bit before. We brought up that that's sort of a central thing going on in the games industry at the moment, and there are a lot of important questions to be answered around the conditions of using a simulation of an actor's voice and like what the payment should be for that. But the union outlined a number of differences between where they were and where the employers were before the strike went ahead. For instance, there was discussion around the compensation when a digital replica of the voice is used in projects, because the employer had a strange definition of digital replica that was clearly deliberately produced to create loopholes so that they could avoid paying actors. For instance, the employer said that for a digital replication to be something they needed to pay for, it needed to be, quote, readily identifiable, end quote, as that performer. So that would give the employers unlimited license to replicate an actor's voice as long as they change certain elements of it. Or the union flagged that a thing that they were quite likely to do would be to blend a couple of different voice actors together to get a performance out of it. And they could have done that without compensating the actor, which feels like bullshit to me. Another key thing that the union flagged up was the employer was not interested in putting any restrictions on what a digital replica of a voice could be made to say. So if you're an actor and your voice was used in this way, your voice could be saying racial slurs. It could be supporting, I don't know, fascist politics or something, or supporting a religion that maybe you're a devout Christian. They've got your voice supporting Hinduism or something. You know, there's a whole bunch of things that you might
make
not
it so that your
want.
voice does not condemn Hamas. You know,
Exactly. God, can you imagine?
they could do that.
So and they can make you say something violent. They can even make you say like sexual stuff without you signing off on it. And that was the employer's position ahead of this strike, sort of hence the need for the strike. So we don't yet know exactly what the settlement includes at time of recording, and we are likely to get more details after this agreement has been sent out for approval or rejection by the members. But a representative for the employers says that it includes a wage increase of over 24% for performers, quote, enhanced health and safety protections and industry-leading AI provisions requiring transparency, consent, and compensation for the use of digital replicas in games, end quote. And reminder, that's a quote from the employers, just so we're aware. So if that is if how the employers are presenting it is true, this does sound like a huge win for the union and for the workers. And we've seen that this has seemed to improve as the negotiations have gone on. I remember in, I want to say January or February time, there was a rumor that they were looking about a 15% pay increase for performers. We seem to have ended up over 24% apparently. So as this has gone on, it seems like the unions managed to extract more and more concessions, which is great to see. Equity, the UK union who would cover voice actors, put out a celebratory statement applauding SAG-AFTRA, but challenging the same employers to come to the negotiating table with Equity on the same areas. Equity has not been able to go out on strike over this issue due to the sort of highly constraining anti-union laws introduced in the last few decades in the UK. But John Barclay, the Assistant General Secretary for Recorded Media at Equity, said, quote, Equity UK now calls upon the very same global engagers to meet with us to negotiate an agreement for our video games performers in the world's most lucrative industries that will bring fair rates of pay along with contractual terms covering AI. The UK cannot be the poor relation, especially when the industry and engagers here in the UK are supported by tax breaks, end quote. So yeah, this is clearly a story of how striking can get the goods, how vital workers' unions are in this industry and all industries, and how it looks to possibly like a win for workers in one country maybe strengthening the bargaining position of workers abroad as
Mm.
well. So it's a good news story. Again, we'll wait for the full details to come out, but it seems like straightforwardly a big win for the workers here. So congratulations, guys.
Good news. We don't get that very often.
Shout out.
Hey, good news.
Woohoo!
Hooray. And that thus endeth my news.
Well, from that, great news for the workers.
High.
It's time to immerse ourselves, plunge headfirst into an orgy of consumerism, just like the world of Mario Kart World. That's right. It's what used to be called E3. So the last week or so has been previously, if you don't know, you're not as big a nerd as I am and organize your entire year around this. But there used to be a trade show in America called E3, the Electronic Entertainment Expo, around about this time of year, early June. Basically, all the video game announcements were kind of focused on. Now, they had a lot of trouble. They're organized by a rubbish organization called the ESRB in America. And basically, it collapsed a few years. I mean, it got pretty much taken out by COVID, and they tried to limp on a bit afterwards, but never managed it. But in its wake, after being cancelled, has come Summer Games Fest, which is organized by our good friend, and let's just say friend of the podcast, in spiritual form, if nothing else, Jeff Keighley, the guy who does the Game Awards. We all love Jeff. He puts on a show which is sort of like a bit of a light E3, and he also has in LA a place where like members of the press can go and play games and stuff, which incidentally this year directly coincided with the time and location of all the protests in LA. And I've heard of the game journalist Patrick Klepek got shot by a
Incredible.
paintball by some random guy going by, not the police. I don't know if that's good or bad that it wasn't the police that shot him. But it seems like it's a pretty crazy time to put that on, but well, I guess it happened. But there are as always happens now, there are a whole bunch of these shows, most of which we're not going to talk about. There's a bunch of much smaller ones. But there were kind of three main ones, which were a Sony State of Play announcement. And these are this is in the form of what the Nintendo Directs that they've done. They're all online, just basically a bunch of videos. Then there was Summer Games Fest itself, which was a big kind of press conference with Jeff Keighley on a stage, and for about 2 hours. And then at the end of it, there was an Xbox showcase as well. So we're not going to go through all the games, but just going through the three shows. PlayStation opened up with Lumines Arise, a new Lumines game. This is a puzzle game that came out on the PSP originally. There's been a few versions since then. But the guy who makes it, Mizuguchi, what's his first name? I can't remember. But he's the guy who made Rez, and he also most recently made Tetris Effect to great aplomb, and I was a big fan of that. This is quite clearly
good in VR.
Yeah, and in VR as well. This game is also in VR, and this is quite clearly the kind of Tetris Effect version of Lumines. And it looks pretty good. I never got on with Lumines, unfortunately, but maybe I can crack it because I do think it looks good. It has the same kind of graphical style as well. Next up was Pragmata, which is a game they announced ages and ages ago. Finally is apparently coming out next year. A game where you play a spaceman with a little girl on his shoulder going around a space station. Who knows what's going on there? Some kind of horror thing. Suda51, famous creator, made Killer 7 and the No More Heroes games that were out. Kind of a famous eclectic guy. He's got a new game coming out called Romeo is a Dead Man. It looks, as quite often is the case here, weird and also runs quite badly as a game, which is quite often the way it is with him. Next up was Silent Hill F, or Silent Hilf, as I like to call it. I look forward to the sequel Silent MILF. It's Silent Hill, but now it's in Japan, which is a bit weird because Silent Hill is a...
That was a bit of silent filth from you there.
Oh, there we go.
Ah.
That works with a kind of cockney. You got to say there with an F. Yeah. Silent Hill. Like that.
Hilf.
Yeah, so this is in Japan, which is weird because Silent Hill is explicitly a town in America. But whatever. Psychological horror again. I really liked Silent Hill 2 remake, so maybe this will be good, but it's not made by the same people. Bloodstained, it's back. They make a new Bloodstained. This is the kind of spiritual sequel to the Metroidvania games, the Castlevania half of them. We talked about them in the previous episode, so they're making another one of those. That's quite good. Final Fantasy Tactics: The Evilest Chronicles. This is kind of a remaster of Final Fantasy Tactics, the PlayStation 1 game. This is a weird thing because this was leaked. There was a leak years ago now by NVIDIA. They accidentally put out a list of all these games in development and that have slowly been proved right over and over again. This is one of the last holdouts. So this also is real. One of the other games on there was a remake of Final Fantasy IX. So this seems to finally kind of really prove that's actually happening, but we still haven't heard anything, and it has been years. This thing looks good, although considering we know it's been in development quite a long time, it does not look like that much of a remaster. But I've never got around to playing it, so maybe I'll try it out. Baby Steps. This is a new game from Bennett Foddy, who made Getting Over It, which is kind of started a whole trend of games which are big on Twitch. But this is kind of a whole 3D world where you specifically control this one weird guy's legs, and you have to individually move his feet every step of the way. It looks weird.
Sounds quite similar to Getting Over It.
It is quite similar, yeah. It's a Foddy like.
Not played that game, but I enjoyed Patricia Taxon's video on that game.
Oh, really? I'll have to check it out. But there's loads of these games that, like the game of Sisyphus. That's basically a similar type game. This appears to be an open world game version of that. He's got a much bigger budget now, it seems. I guess that game did well for him. There are a few other games really announced. Mortal Kombat is coming a collection of the old 2D games. That's nice. What else? Metal Gear Solid Delta, the remake of Metal Gear Solid 3. That's coming. Neo 3, they're making a new one of those. They're making a version of Thief in VR. Thief, one of the original immersive Sims. I guess it's still alive in some way because it got eaten up by IDOS and people didn't really like the last one.
Yeah, they did a remake, didn't they, like 10 years ago?
Yeah, it wasn't a remake, it was a new game.
Which I don't think was, but it was called Thief
just called
again,
Thief,
wasn't it?
yeah. It was a reboot, I guess.
Reboot, yeah, that's it. But that wasn't that well received.
No, people didn't like it, but I didn't have a chance to play it myself. Sword of the Sea. This is a weird game because it's by the makers of Abzu and The Pathless, which are these two kind of arty games that came out. But it says in the trailer, it has some of the people who worked on Journey. And you can tell because this game looks almost exactly like Journey. Like, embarrassingly like Journey, except you surf around on a sword. But I mean, there's a whole bit in Journey where famously you surf around. So, I don't know. I think it's a bit shameless to me. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it'd be nice. I mean, it's not like they ever made Journey 2. Now, this is a big one. IO Interactive, who make the Hitman games, they finally showed off their James Bond game, which is called First Light. No actual gameplay, though. And I've got to say, James Bond himself, he kind of looks like a massive cunt. He's like a younger guy, and he just looks like a wanker. He just looks like the kind of guy.
Is he modelled on a specific actor?
No.
Is he one of the
There are some
canonical
There
ones?
are some like minor actors that I've seen in things who are playing the other parts, but he just appears a fake person, you know. I think the whole point is he's like a preppy young guy, and then over the course of the game, he will like harden and become like the James Bond we all know.
He's like a
We're gonna have to look
like a what's the fucking treasure hunter game? You just
Uncharted.
Nathan Drake.
Uncharted. That's what I was.
He does
like,
have a bit of that about
type.
it, but like Nathan Drake was meant to be a little bit older and also a bit kind of world weary, whereas this guy just looks like a preppy.
What's this game called?
First Light. First Light.
First Light.
Yeah, 007 First Light.
Mads Mikkelsen.
No, he's not actually. This was announced actually at Summer Game Festival, which we'll get to in a sec. But because IO Interactive make the Hitman games, to kind of promote this, they're putting out a Hitman mission with Mads Mikkelsen as the character he played in
that is
Casino Royale.
That's going to result in confusion.
I can definitely see where you've got Nathan Drake from.
Yeah, right? He's just a white brunette man. Oh, you don't like me saying brunette? Never mind. Brown head man.
Brunette's a woman. Oh, I'm not getting back into this.
Since we've had that conversation, I've asked multiple people, and they say brunette is fine for men. Anyway,
some of these pictures.
I'm just going to point out we had this conversation over the text on your stream, not actually on this podcast. So the listeners may not know what we're talking about.
In some of these pictures, he looks a bit like Ewan McGregor from his Obi-Wan days.
A little bit.
They clearly tried to go for Scrappy. It's not really paying off, though. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
We'll see. Maybe it's. I mean, you know, IO Interactive make great games, but I was kind of maybe hoping for a more interesting take on James Bond. I suppose as a podcast, we should be anti-James Bond as a tool of imperialism, but whatever. We can't be perfect. Sony continuing. They showed a very small amount of Ghost of Yotei because they're going to have a wider, expanded look at it in July. That's the sequel to Ghost of Tsushima. That's coming out later this year. And then their big kind of reveal at the end of the show was it's frankly an odd name for this, Marvel Toku Fighting Souls, which is a new fighting game made by Arc Systems Works, who made Guilty Gear games and maybe a bit more relevantly Dragon Ball Fighters with a Z on the end. And this is a new Marvel fighting game that looks very similar in style to the old Capcom Marvel games, Marvels versus Capcom, but it's not made by Capcom, and I know some fighting game fans were hoping that they were making them because they re-released those games recently, and this basically seems to show that they definitely aren't. So it kind of took people by surprise, and the fact that this is published by Sony. They're also, earlier in the show, they showed off a fighting stick, which they've never done before, and people were a bit surprised about. So it seems like they're obviously doing it for this game. So it seems like an odd move from Sony directly into fighting games. But maybe not that odd, because a few years ago, they actually bought Evo, which is the big fighting game championship they have every year. So I guess they've got an interest in it.
More so than me, I'll be honest. Fighting games, not my
I'm not a
thing.
fighting game guy either, but this does look really cool. The whole thing is it's all Marvel stuff, but they're based, because it's got that name because they're really leaning into the fact that it's made in Japan. All the characters speak Japanese. They did in the trailer. It looked like they probably aren't even going to dub it. And they're all kind of Japanese versions, like anime style of these characters. So like Iron Man looks like a Gundam, basically. That's what they've done.
Sure.
So anyway, it looks pretty cool for fans of that, I guess. Yeah. So that was PlayStation. The next one up was Keighley's Summer Game Fest. Now, there are a lot more games announced here. It was 2 hours long. But as is often the case in these things, not many of them were that interesting. I feel like every year people complain about it, that it wasn't all bangers in this thing, because they forget that every year it was the same the last year. But some highlights. I mean, this isn't a highlight, but I've got to say, there's a game that was announced called Chronicles Medieval, which is the most generic name I could ever imagine for a game. It looks like a big thing where it's like medieval battles or something, simulator. Seriously, that's the best they could come up with. Unbelievable. But what have we got? So here's one which is maybe somewhat in our interest. There is a sequel to Atomic Heart 2. Now, I don't know if either of you two played the original Atomic Heart, but this is a game that really, really heavily ripped off BioShock. It was very BioShocky, but it's a Russian game that was set in, I guess, the 1960s in a Soviet utopia that was like made by robots, and then the robots go crazy, basically. So there is a lot of Soviet imagery in it. The first 20 minutes, you get to briefly walk around this Soviet utopia before things go wrong. And it's kind of like what all our dreams were. The dream of what if it all worked super well in the Soviet Union, even if it only lasts 20 minutes or something. It really wasn't a very good game, but did have quite an arresting visual style. But I really cannot stress how much this game ripped off BioShock. I think people do not appreciate how much that. I think most people didn't finish it and didn't see, like, even the end is like a complete rip-off of BioShock. It's kind of crazy. But it wasn't great. But they're making another one, which will presumably be another romp through high-tech Soviet world. So that inherently has some interest, I feel, to people like us, even if it's just aesthetics. They're also putting out a game that is called The Cube, in which is apparently set in the same world, in which a giant cube appears in the sky, and it's a multiplayer game where you're on top of the cube. That's all I really know about it.
What?
Yeah. These games, gotta say, these games.
The cube.
Yeah, these games.
What if there was a cube?
What if? We'll find out. What if there was?
That sounds like a dystopian game show.
79, 99.
It's a bit like, it
You
does
could
sound
find
like,
out.
It's not a game show in the thing. But I will say, I don't know that Atomic Heart 1 did terribly well. I think it probably did okay, maybe. There was a bit of buzz of it at the time. These games seem like crazily high budget. Like, Atomic Heart 2 is now also like a appears to be like a BioShock style RPG. At least you can have like conversations with people and go to like social areas and stuff. And like there's like 14 different things that like it seemed like it was completely different games at different points in the trailer. Like, oh, it's this and now is this.
Mm.
It might be open world. I couldn't really tell. And I just like I do not really understand where they're getting the money from. I wonder if it's like a money laundering thing because I don't know how they can possibly afford to make these two giant games. But there we go.
Of course, we are not alleging there's any money
No,
laundering
no. I
involved
don't know. That's my
in a video
that's my
game.
fantasy speculation. I think they might be money laundering in mind. Getting back to the show, they showed some more off of Onimusha. Then they showed this game, which is very strange, called Felt Bat Boxing. And this is a game that is entirely puppets, as in like Muppet style puppets, in which, I mean, a lot of it was just like cutscenes that we saw, but it appears to be a game like Punch Out. But the thing is that this game might have some of the best graphics I have ever seen. These look exactly like Muppets. I mean, they've got like all the little bits of hair on them. They are
They look
perfectly
exactly like
they are, I
Muppets.
mean,
Such a
genuinely,
weird
I
sentence.
assumed like this was like FMV and they just filmed some Muppets doing this stuff, and then you start seeing, oh wait, this is actually gameplay, and like when you really look, you can see like the small imperfections that show it's actually 3D video game, but it's incredible
Mm.
graphically to show off some Muppets. I guess it works because it's largely just pretty much just the puppets on screen. There's not much else going on, so they can focus it all on these things. But genuinely, some of the most incredible graphics I've ever seen for this game about Muppets doing boxing, and they're all flailing around like Muppets do as well. Certainly, one of the most interesting things there. What else we have? Out of Words, a game that kind of looks a bit like.
Oh no, so now we have Out of Words, Out of Wilds, and Out of Worlds.
Oh yeah,
That's fucking
Let's add more
terrible.
to
Can
it.
we stop? Guys, what the fuck?
Well, this
Stop!
I mentioned this game because this might be something for you and your fiance, Ed, because this is another game that's a co-op thing, very arty game.
Mm.
It's like a trend I've apparently seen too much of, where they want to make it look like stop motion animation. I think that's already been too done. I don't like this reduced frame rate thing in video games. They seem to be doing that, but it looks pretty cool. Apparently, it's these two characters who, for some reason, lose their mouths, and so they can't talk to each other. I don't really know how that works as a co-op thing, because obviously the co-op people would be able to talk to each other, but we'll see, I guess. What else do we have? Mina the Hollower. So this is Yacht Club Games, which unfortunately, every time I see it, it makes me think of, the Bored Ape Yacht Club, who made all those NFTs. And do they even still exist?
Yeah.
Let's hope not. They are these guys are unrelated. Don't worry. These are the people who made Shovel Knight, and this is finally
Oh right, yeah.
their next game. They spent ages putting out like weird spin-offs of Shovel Knight, but this is finally a brand new game for them. It kind of looks a lot like, we mentioned it earlier, Link's Awakening, on the Game Boy Color. It looks a lot like that. It's clearly driven by that, the graphical styles in that style, though it's a full widescreen, just like Shovel Knight was. But yeah, should be good. Look forward to that. That is actually coming out this year on Halloween. So that's fun.
Spooky.
What else do we have? Oh, big thing. This was very exciting. Scott Pilgrim EX. So Scott Pilgrim, the series of comics that came out, and then there was a movie in the early 2010s, I think, when that came out.
Late 2000, late noughties,
Maybe something like that. When that movie came out, there was a game that came out along with it, which is frankly one of the best movie game like conversions that's ever come out, because it was such like a pitch
2010.
perfect
2010.
2010, yeah, a pitch perfect concept, because the movie and the comic of Scott Pilgrim is all based around the structure of this NES game, River City Ransom. And so they made a River City Ransom style game for this, which is a scrolling beat 'em up. And it also had incredible animation from this guy called Paul Robertson, who had just come up. So it was just like a perfect confluence. It had music from Anna Managuchi, which are a great chiptune artist. So just like everything just came together for this one game. They re-released it a little while ago. I don't know if you can buy it now because it's lost in copyright stuff. But they are making a sequel, and pretty much it seems that all the same people came together. Tribute Games is the studio that actually, I think, came out of the studio that made the original Scott Pilgrim game. So it's pretty much the same people. Paul Robertson's working on it. the original author of the thing is writing a story for it. Yeah, so looks great. It's got the same pixel art style. I can't wait. I'm really excited about that. What else have we got? Ill. This was a weird game. I think this was actually published by the Atomic Heart people, but it was like a really kind of disgusting looking horror first person game. But it had a very kind of arresting style to it. It was really kind of disgusting in a good way. So Wu-Tang. They're making a Wu-Tang game. I know you've been looking forward to it. Wu-Tang, it's a game now. This is actually the second game they've ever made.
What's the genre?
They showed a very small amount of it. It seems to be like maybe a character action game. You don't play as one of the Wu-Tang. The Wu-Tang have been kidnapped and you have to go rescue them. There was a Wu-Tang game on the PlayStation back in the 90s. I'll say that. I think this might be the second
It's
one.
one for all the killer bees out there.
Now, annoyingly, it's not on this list, I don't think, which is annoying because we kind of built this whole thing around this. Sorry about that. But something that did happen at this show is something we're going to talk to Sofie about. And have a little segue, a Sofie segue, about a certain thing that happened. So let's hear it.
Yeah, so basically, there's a Splitgate 2, which is kind of 1047's, like, I guess they released it. When did they release it? Just last week. So it came out just last week to sort of mix.
I think it was a new version of it. It existed for a while.
Right, okay.
But
Okay, yeah, so there you go. So a new version of it, yeah, sort of they made an announcement of a Battle Royale mode at Summer Games Fest. The sort of launch of the game had kind of
How exciting.
mixed reviews. Another Battle Royale. Yay!
Hooray.
But the biggest drama was that Ian Proulx, there you go. So the game director, Ian Proulx, not really sure how to pronounce the name there, basically came out sort of on stage wearing a hat that read "Make FPS Great Again," which is obviously, which then got obviously criticized because hilariously the article I'm reading puts it as comes with quote unquote significant political baggage, which I thought was a really nice, polite way of putting that. So
he's being an edgy boy.
I will say the hat was black. It was not red. But then,
then he's just
Elon Musk
as well. Yeah,
Elon
exactly.
Musk has worn a black hat that says shit like this as well. So
exactly. So then he's just doing dark MAGA is what he's doing. Dark gothic MAGA. So yeah, basically
dark
shit.
macadamia.
Dark MAGA. I'm Ian Proulx. I have dark MAGA. So yeah, basically shit hit the fan after that. And he was asked to sort of apologize about it and then refused to apologize, basically saying, quote, "I don't regret what I said, to be candid. My intent is I'm speaking my truth, and my intent is to make a great game for everybody," when asked about the hat, which, I don't know, I just have this personal hatred for the phrase "my truth." Nobody has to take that seriously, but I hate it.
Hashtag truth.
It's your hashtag truth. I hate that phrase. And I feel like it's very like virtue signaling to use a phrase like that in a non-apology like that, where it's like, hey, it doesn't matter, you know. I just think we should make FPS games great again. What's wrong with the phrase, you know? But yeah, so he was sort of mentioned that, noting he sort of said on Twitter that he was not going to apologize and made that statement on Twitter. And then later he did actually apologize on Twitter, I guess assuming from like continuous online backlash. And the quote tweet, it was actually in the form of a video, so it was like a little video apology, probably sort of classic apology style. It was a little sigh at the beginning, I'm sure.
Played a ukulele.
Yeah, exactly. Plays a little ukulele. And he says, quote, "I want to apologize, and genuinely, you don't have to believe me, but the truth is, I am sorry.
Okay.
And the reason I am sorry is because of what this has done to the community.
Oh.
The most important thing to me right now is I want to have an amazing community. I hate seeing division, and that's what I'm seeing now, on both sides. There's division in the community, and for that I am truly sorry. And again, I'll reiterate, I do stand by the intent of this, which is, the intent truly is, take it at face value. We do want to improve this genre. We do feel that the genre is in a bad state. We want to make FPS games as amazing as possible. But I also understand that it's not just about intent, it's about impact. And the platform that we have had has had a negative impact. And for that, I'm truly sorry." Which is a hilarious apology. Obviously, it addresses nothing that's actually wrong with the hat. That is the most amorphous fog of an apology I've seen in a long time, and I do love a bad apology.
As a chat GPT apology, if I've ever heard
Literally
one.
is, yeah, literally. So, yeah, just
I'm speaking my hashtag
I'm speaking my
truth,
hashtag
but on the
truth.
surface,
I'm sorry that it created
I
division.
still stand by what I
I'm
said.
really sorry that you're mad. I'm sorry that your reaction was to be mad about this. It really is.
I'm sorry that you didn't understand what I
It's
was
literally,
doing.
I'm sorry you feel that way, right?
Sorry you got too emotional about my brave words.
And so yeah, as far as I can tell, that's sort of it. I guess you made this sort of comment in light of basically saying I'm tired of Call of Duty. I don't want more games like Call of Duty, and people being like, "Hey, what the fuck? We like Call of Duty."
Well, I mean, it was more like
Yeah.
just like went on stage and just like slagged off about. I think it wasn't just Call of
Yeah.
Duty, just like so FPS are shit now, man. We're gonna make FPS great again. We don't want just
Yeah.
another Call of Duty. And then his actual game is, I mean, I think people like Splitgate, but it can be described almost entirely as Halo,
Halo
but
with portals.
with the portals from the game Portal. That is almost
Mhm.
exactly what it is. And again, that's already out. But what he was announcing was that now we're doing a battle royale game,
Which is
mode,
very
hardly-
original. That's
Yeah.
groundbreaking. That's
Exactly.
groundbreaking stuff.
Well, in the theme of the ad watch that I mentioned earlier, getting so much Fortnite Switch advertising, I'm also getting so much of this game being
Well,
advertised.
I don't get
So
games
much.
adverts ever.
Oh.
Weirdly
I'll
enough.
tell you the other advert that I've had for the first time today. I've had 3 times today. Is pro-Israel
Oh,
adverts,
really?
like explicitly.
I report them.
Yeah, saying
When I
like,
get them, I report them.
It's a good.
Well,
I think that's a good idea.
Dear listener,
It's like it's just saying like, would you give someone who kidnaps a state like that? Is that kind of vibe?
dear listener, we are recording this the day after Israel started bombing Iran. So that probably relates to that. Yeah.
Interesting connection that's
Interesting. They're
popped up now.
Where we such a small country? We're just a little guy.
I don't know. I just think these advertisers that have correctly determined that you're gonna be you love the idea of
battle royales or
You love
whatever.
Fortnite. You love guns. You must love
you're-
Israel.
You're right.
Big guns. I guess that the money that they spend on me is money they've wasted.
This
I
is
guess
true.
so.
I
That's the
report
only
the
upside.
ads. I do.
Mm.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Shall we get back to the show? There's not much left to it. 2 main things, big things they announced. Really, they showed more of Stranger Than Heaven, which is the new name for what was previously called Project Century, which is RGG Studio. That's Ryoga Gaguta Studio, which are the people who make the Yakuza games, now known as Like a Dragon games. They have got a new game that seems like unrelated to the Yakuza series game they've been making, which they announced previously. Now, the previous showing seemed to be set in 1915 in Japan, and this one seemed to be set in 1943. I mean, it had the giant numbers 1943 on screen. So clearly they're doing some sort of passage of time. There's some suggestion that this guy might be supernatural or something. The game seems to be set in, having been there personally, and I'm sure Sophie can join me in this, having been to Osaka in Japan, where I've heard you once lived, Sophie.
I did. Not in Osaka, though.
In the Yakuza games, you can visit the Sotenbori area, which is a big kind of tourist area, the nightlife area, though it's called Dotonbori in those games. This seems to be Sotenbori, though it may also be Dotonbori because they reused.
I think
these
Dotonbori
areas.
is the real life one.
Oh,
so
have I got it mixed up again? I
Yeah,
always get it
so
mixed up.
Dotonbori is the real one, and then
All
Sotonbori
right.
must be the made up one.
Sotenbori, yeah. Sotenbori is the fake one. Sorry, this may be for Sotenbori as well.
Which you'll recognize from the Running Man sign. That's Dotonbori.
But this is difficult to tell because it's set in 1943 and it looks very different.
Wasn't there?
Yeah, this is the issue, isn't it?
Weren't historical events occurring?
This is the issue, and I'm kind of surprised that no one has remarked on this of what's going on in Japan in 1943. I've got to say, it's pretty ballsy of them to visit this. I don't think I've ever seen another Japanese video game set during wartime or even imperial era Japan outright.
Yeah.
We'll see how they handle it, I guess. I think there's been a lot of missteps even recently. So I'm not super jazzed for it, but we'll see. But something to look forward to. I mean, I guess you got to, like Sophie was saying with Kentucky Route Zero, you got to give them props for going there, I suppose. But we'll find out. And then the kind of big reveal of the show was a little bit. They did a little bit of trickery. They did a little bit of trickery at one point. So for a long time, in general, people have been, there's one kind of due that there's surely going to be a new Resident Evil game coming out, and there were rumors there would be one at this summer game, the whole set of summer game fest shows. And at one point in the middle of the show, they announce and here's something from the woman who played the big tall lady from Resident Evil 8, who everyone made horny memes about.
Dimitrescu.
Yes.
She
said
comes
that
up
with
in
a-
my vampire essay.
You said that with a kind of wistfulness, got to be said.
She comes up in my
Dimitrescu,
vampire essay.
very dreamy.
Mm.
Anyway, the woman who does the voice, who does not share the gigantic physique of that lady, was there and did a very fun job doing a very campy turn, when it became very clear very early that she was just advertising a sale of Capcom games. We're slashing prices, she said.
Mhm.
It was very fun. But people were like, oh, is this something? Oh, it's just a sale. Okay.
Boo.
And then some time passed, and then Jeff Keighley went on stage to announce a big, and something from an important game producer or something, and it's that woman again, and she starts singing "Happy Birthday," and she announced, "Oh, it's the I think the 30th anniversary of Resident Evil coming up," and she passes it on to this guy whose name I forget, and I don't have it written down here, but he is the executive producer in charge of Resident Evil. And people are, wow, oh, this is it. He's going to announce something. And he just goes on and he
There
says,
it is.
"Oh, yeah, we're making something, and we'll announce it when the time's right." And then that's it. It ends.
Oh,
And
We're
so people are like,
certainly
what the fuck was
making
that?
something.
this game developer is
Yeah.
certainly developing
He's
a
developing
game.
something.
But then at the end of the show,
That's true. We haven't got confirmation it's a game. That's a good point, Sophie.
Yeah,
It's
true.
just
Something.
something. That's even worse than Elder
But-
Scrolls.
don't get too excited in anticipation, because at the end of the show, Jeff Keighley does his usual thing at the end of these of like massively hyping this final thing he's going to show. It's going to turn video games on their head. He's so incredibly privileged to show this. He even got a bit choked up announcing this, which was frankly a bit much.
It's a remake of Resident Evil 4.
Well, no.
Hooray!
They already did that. No,
Yeah, like a million times.
He cuts to this game, this mystery game, and it's something happening at the FBI, and there's a woman at the FBI, and things going on. Very good graphics, but it's not very clear that it's anything yet. And long story short, as it goes along, it becomes clear this is in fact Resident Evil 9. And the time you'd have to wait to find out what they were making was literally maybe 20 minutes.
Wow.
So they had a little fun with it. The game looks cool. It seems that in you just mentioned it, Resident Evil 4, they announced that they dropped a nuclear bomb on Raccoon City, which is where all the previous games took place in, where there was the zombie outbreak.
Mhm.
This appears to be set, at least in part, in the bombed out remains of Raccoon City. So it looks like it'll be quite nostalgic, and then they're going for this anniversary thing. So probably a bunch of familiar faces and so on will return. I'm not a huge Resident Evil fan. I loved 4 when it came out. I couldn't really get into the old fixed perspective ones. I did enjoy Resident Evil 2 a lot, the remake. I'll probably give this a go, but I haven't played any of the new ones. But that was the big reveal for that one. There was one more show, the Xbox show. Now, we won't talk about this in great detail because of BDS, but there were a few things here that kind of had wider ramifications or were bigger stories that would probably get talked about. So the big one is that they announced hardware. They announced a handheld Xbox. However, there have been rumors of them making this for quite a while. This isn't really that. It seems that from the rumors, those were the rumors. Now the new rumors are that they have abandoned that, and they have just decided to essentially rebrand one of these competitors to the Steam Deck that have come out. In this case, the ROG Xbox Ally. I want to say Ally. It's the Ally. There is now the Xbox. Well, sorry, they already put out the ROG Ally. Now there's an Xbox Ally. There's an X1 and a not X1, and the X1 is more powerful. And it's got a button that has an Xbox logo on it, and you can press that to open your Xbox games or something. It's probably an okay way to play Xbox games, but it's worth saying the game they showed off on it was a very brief glimpse of Hollow Knight Silksong, which was the only appearance of Silksong at any of these things, which is a much anticipated game and I'm sure will be very good, but it's also not going to be a particularly taxing game for a system. It would be weird if it couldn't play that. It's unclear how many actual Xbox games this would be able to play, and it's got quite a low compatibility level. So basically, there are all these Steam Deck style things coming out, and they just slapped their logo on this. Apparently, they've worked with the on the internals somewhat. How true that is unclear. So this is a bit of a damp squib, but I mean, maybe if you're in the market for one of these and they get taken off the BDS list, maybe you want to consider it. Who knows? There were a number of kind of multi-format games that are going to appear on all sorts of things. There's a 3D Super Meat Boy, which looks kind of fun, but it's not made by any of the original Meat Boy people, from my understanding. What else? Well, there was a weird game called There Are No Ghosts in the Grand, which is apparently a combination kind of cozy game where you renovate a hotel, and also a horror game, and also a mystery game, and where you have to like solve a murder or something, and also a musical because there are songs in it.
Okay, it's a lot going
Don't know
on.
how that'll work out. Persona 4 is getting remade just like Persona 3 did. People really like the 3 remake, so I'm sure it will be good. At Fate's End, that's from the people who made the game Spiritfarer, which I know has a lot of fans. That is like, it's kind of, there's no combat, I believe, in that, but there is in this. It's some sort of combat-based game, but it's 2D with a similar visual style. There's going to be an Invincible versus fighting game, where, as we just said, we're all big fighting game fans. And then basically the big ender, which we'll briefly say, because I don't think we would ever recommend you ever buy this under any circumstances, is the new Call of Duty. I only mention it because they're doing Black Ops again. They did Black Ops last year. We talked about it. This is Black Ops 7. I've heard that apparently this is...
I like that record.
The Black Ops game that came out last year that I reviewed was a continuation of like the 1980s timeline, but apparently Black Ops 2, I didn't play it. That's the one that has the war criminal in it, by the way. That was set in the future. Yeah.
Blops,
I
Tops,
played
or
that
Blops,
one.
I remember.
Well, this is exactly my point. We are going to have another opportunity to see if the games media has the courage, the conviction to finally have a review of this game with the subheading, is Blops, Tops, or Plops? We'll find out. We'll find out. We'll find out. We'll see. Don't disappoint me, games media. You've disappointed me 6 times already. Don't do it 7. Don't do it 7.
We beg of you. Please.
And that's it.
For Alex.
That was the whole thing. I missed out a bunch of
games.
stuff that wasn't that exciting. There's the PC games show that wasn't very interesting. That one really does go on forever. There was the Wholesome Games show. I didn't watch that. I'm sure there were lots of farming simulators. People were wondering if Nintendo would have a little show to kind of show what's coming up on the Switch 2 that just came out. I didn't, so we don't know. And that's it, pretty much.
Well,
I
thank
think
you.
that's also going to be it for the show.
I guess, what are we looking forward to out of all of these things? Is there anything that we're looking forward to? Because I don't know. I don't remember hearing a title that I was like, oh, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
I still just want Silksong. That's what I'm looking forward to, and that wasn't even properly there.
I have to say, I think Hollow Knight is a bit overrated. I think it's a good game.
You're a coward.
It's a good game, but I don't know. I'm not really...
It's
I
beautiful.
mean, Silksong literally
Gorgeous.
looks...
Hollow Knight?
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, Hollow Knight,
The
right.
music
Okay,
is
yeah.
gorgeous.
Silksong's the
Yeah,
sequel
yeah.
to Hollow Knight.
Okay. I see. I've not played
The
it.
upcoming.
Yeah.
I
It's pretty dope.
worth
I like
playing.
watching
It's worth
people
playing.
play it.
Give it a go. But
I like watching
think
people play it.
I think it's fine. I don't really like the sprites. I don't like the look of it.
Well, they don't really like you, Alex. So how about that?
All right. Well, on that bombshell, maybe we should move on. I don't think any of us are particularly excited about any of those games.
No,
the-
yeah.
The big,
Really?
I mean, Resident Evil 9. I might play
People
it.
people keep telling me to play Resident Evil just because it's got
I mean, you
vampires.
love
in it.
horror.
It's
You
like,
love
yeah, I
horror
probably
games
should.
as well. You really should.
I don't really do a lot of horror, to be honest. Actually, I think people think that about me, but I don't actually play a lot of horror. But I know I should play the Resident Evil games
Common
because
myth.
most of
You
it's
give
got
spooky
vampires
vibes.
in it.
You give off spooky vibes.
Thank you.
Spooky
Thank you so much. I
vibes.
take that as a compliment on
I
the
meant
Lord's Day, the 13th of Friday the 13th. I
It's
appreciate
Friday the
that.
13th, listeners.
Mm.
That's
So,
true.
take that under advisement.
Yeah, so maybe a Resident Evil. Maybe I should finally get into a Resident Evil.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I was into fighting games, that Marvel game would probably be really exciting. It's not my thing, though. Oh, well. A negative viewpoint.
Yeah.
Which is a real pity, because this is the 10th anniversary of the greatest E3 ever, which was 2015, which is the one where they showed off, the Sony show where they showed off Last Guardian, and then Final Fantasy VII Remake, and then Shenmue 3. 3 games no one ever thought could ever happen. And this is how they follow up on it. It's depressing.
What were they
Lots
thinking?
of sequels.
But no, I think that there are some good games coming out. I think, that I like IO. I think that James Bond game will probably be fun, even if he looks like a wanker. I will say there is a game actually that was briefly shown on one of these. I forgot to mention, which is Mind's Eye. I just want to briefly talk about this because this game has actually come out and it's been a bizarre kind of mess. It's like apparently it's full of bugs. I mean, just by watching these things, it was obvious this game is gonna flop. It looks like a big budget game that is also maybe 10 years out of date. It just seems like the most generic thing you could ever see. Maybe we'll talk about it next episode, because if that story goes any further, because there's a whole heap of odd things that have come out around that game. So look forward to Mind's Eye, everyone. But with that, I think we should probably actually end. I think we're done. I'm Alex. You can reach me at Alex Dean, ALEXDUIN, on whatever Twitter is now, and at Alex Dean, ALEXDUIN.bsky.social on Blue Sky. What about you, Sophie? How can people reach you?
Yeah, I stream 4 days a week on Twitch, twitch.tv/SoFreely.
And Ed, what about you?
I am at Still Not a Lemon on X and at Not a Lemon on Blue Sky. So hit me up.
I don't really know
Looking
if
forward to hearing from you.
Your dedication to facing reality of calling it X is better or worse than my revanchlist sticking with Twitter.
I go back and forth on it. At a certain point, I feel like it's more cringy to keep calling it
That's the
Twitter
thing.
than
I do have mixed feelings about it. Yeah, I think the cringiest is when people are like, Twitter, I'm sorry, I'm not calling it X. It's like, all right, that's the cringiest option.
I feel like I've done that on this podcast at least once. So,
but apart
when
from
I
when
do,
you did
I feel
that,
when you
funny
did
and
it, was
original.
really funny and novel.
Yeah. I do. I mean, I think X is just also a terrible name, even regardless of
It is
meaningless. And all the
It is.
politics. It just sounds shit.
It's bad.
It does.
Anyway, okay, well, you can get
Guys, Elon Musk, not good.
As for the podcast itself, on Twitter /X, you can reach us at Red Barrels Pod. On Blue Sky, we're at Red Barrels Podcast.bsky.social. Please share us. I don't like keep calling you a coward, but I don't know if you listen, a significant personal listener, until I have clear documentary proof that every single person who listens to us shared us on social media. I will keep doing. So, prove me wrong. We've also got music from Brilliant Drink. You like the music? You love the music. It's Brilliant Drink who did that. And that really is it. Any last words from my co-hosts? Anything else? Come on.
I hope nothing bad happened to you this Friday the 13th.
It is Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th.
It is.
What that means is that we're going to suffer.
Nearly summer solstice.
We're going to suffer some sort of terrible affliction to the podcast, and it'll sound terrible, or we'll lose it entirely.
Touch wood.
Surely.
Can't imagine that
not.
ever happening. But for now, it is going to be goodbye.
Bye.